Good morning, everyone. My name is GP Lee. GP stands for good person. Welcome to the 18th CalPlug workshop, Optimizing Energy Efficiency in Space. This is a really very important time in our generations to fight the climate change. And our focus today is try to emphasizing how we can achieve our goal by optimizing energy efficiency in various space we live in, we work with, and so on. At this time, I want to really take opportunity to thank all the audience participating in today's events. Also want to thank all the distinguished speakers to present their solutions and suggestions to fight this climate change. And lastly, I want to thank all the staff who put this today's program together for sharing with all of us. So for today's program, we will have a speaker present first, and at the end of the last 30 minutes of the workshop, we will invite all the speakers back as a panelist to have a joint discussion and how we can all work together. So if you have any question, you can use a GoToMeeting chat room and type in your questions, and the staff will email me and I can read out your question for after each speaker, as well as at the end of the panel discussions. So at this time, let's start with today's first speaker, Dr. Zhao. He is the newest addition to CalPlug. He is the CalPlug Technology Director. So Lee, please take it away.
So let me share my screen first. Is this? So everybody hopefully could see my screen here, which is on my title page. So I will start. Thank you, GP, for the introduction, and welcome everyone to our workshop. So in the next 15 minutes, I will talk about our vision and our approach while CalPlug marching into our research center's second decade. And that will be CalPlug's holistic approach facing the challenges and opportunities in energy transition, decarbonization, and electrification. Let me start with some buzzword, because this is morning, like everybody with their coffee. So carbon-free, carbon zero, carbon neutral, carbon negative, net zero, Z and E. So we heard these words more frequently in our everyday life, and each of these words has their own context and definitions, and often they are not interchangeable. But these terms has one thing in common, that is to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. So currently we have a national goal of achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050, and a rapid decarbonization is our overarching path to this net zero future. And this race to zero has two complementary pathways. The first pathway focuses on the supply side, which is decarbonizing the gas and electricity system, that it also refers as the energy transition. The second pathway focuses on demand side, which is decarbonizing across all end-use sectors, transportation, buildings, industry, and agriculture. And this is our focus, that what we could contribute in decarbonizing the end-use sectors. So decarbonizing the end-use sectors has many challenges, and these challenges are often specific, very specific, and cross-cutting, and also cluttered with sector barriers. there are 5 technically feasible key pillars for end-use sector decarbonization. The most affordable and available pillar is energy efficiency, means use the least amount of energy. The second one is electrification. Since we are decarbonizing the grid at the same time, electrification means utilize more from cleaner source. The next pillar is grid interactive and flexibility, which means use at the right time. The right time will depend on renewable source dynamics, grid dynamics, and market dynamics. The fourth pillar is on-site distributed energy resources and energy storage. This will provide more flexibility and offset the end-use demand more efficiently on-site, but often with a higher cost. Currently, the least affordable and available pillar is carbon capture and sequestration, meaning intentionally remove CO2. For the last decade, our center focused on the energy efficiency pillar, addressing a localized energy efficiency problem and work with plug loads. As we're starting the second decade of CalPlug, we're shifting our focus along with the emerging trends. So in terms of energy efficiency, there will be more and more smart and controllable plug loads emerging in homes and buildings. This will enabling deeper energy saving and more sophisticated controls. In terms of electrification, it is by far the most dynamic element of the energy transition. The share of electricity in global end-use energy amount will double from 19% to 38% within 30 years, next 30 years. There will be more and more new plug and process loads inside homes and buildings. From the supply side, as the energy transition goes on, renewables are all competing all other power sources on the grid and also on the on-site generation side. So therefore, more dynamic grid resources, more locally dispatchable renewable resources will be available, and this have to take into consideration as well. So the trend of energy demand and under supply are changing rapidly. Therefore, decarbonization need to be addressed, not as an isolated system, but holistic approaches. So sector-wise, going forward, we will focus on building and industry sector decarbonizations. As these two sectors combined takes up to more than 50% of the total California end-use GHG emissions. In these two sectors, we will focus on small and medium manufacturers and their buildings. There are nearly 40,000 small, medium-sized manufacturers in California, and they contribute for half of the California manufacturing GDP. And in this new decade, we will focus on the holistic approach and solution, start with the rapidly changing plug and process loads. So currently, the plug and process load take up 1/3 of the total energy consumption in buildings. With the energy transition and electrification, this plug loads and process load will rapidly change in size, and they will rapidly change in the level of control and flexibility, and adding challenges and opportunities at the same time. So here is a simplified one-line diagram, shows the electrification distributed from the substation to the feeders, to the transformers, to the point of connection, and into the buildings, and to the panels, and to the plug and process load at the very bottom. So at the very bottom of the electricity network, there are the nested plug and process load on the receptacles and power strips. So with the advance of the IT and communication technology, together with energy efficiency and electrification, there will be more sensible and controllable plug loads and process load at this very end bottom of the network, meaning more sensible and controllable plug loads, more monitoring and controls for individual loads, and also for aggregated loads. And there will be more ways to aggregate loads to building control and automation systems. And there also will be various implementation rate for smart gizmos of this node on this node. And also inside the building, there will be more electrical loads due to electrification, such as electric heat pumps, electric process heating, electrified fleet like the forklift and equipment and their charging needs as well. So on another layer, the building control strategies that enables great flexibility in the interaction enabled by directional on-site renewables are taking effect on these points. But it needs to aggregate and coordinate as much as loads inside building to be effective. Start at this connection point and down to the nested plug loads and process load at the bottom. So energy efficiency and electrification will introduce more smart or not that smart plug load and process load to the building, and that the existing building control strategies need to be adapted. They need to be able to better accommodate the rapid change of the plug load and process load. They need to be adapted to better utilize on-site PV generations and other sort of energy storage. And they need to be adapted to be better accommodate the grid interaction. So in summary, CalPlug's holistic approach is starting from the very end use, which are the plug and process load, those nested and rapidly changing plug and process loads. By the integration of sensing, measuring, optimization, analytics, and real-time control to provide data and insights to enable optimal orchestration for great interactive efficient buildings, and also to develop economically and technically feasible decarbonization pathways for small and medium-sized commercial buildings and small and medium-sized manufacturers and their buildings. So speaking of small and medium-sized manufacturers, we have a unique access to them in Southern California through the DOE IAC program. So the DOE Industrial Assessment Center helps small and medium-sized U.S. manufacturers save energy, improve productivity, and reduce waste by providing free technical assessment conducted by universities, assessment centers. So over the past 4 decades, nearly 20,000 assessment has been done, and 150,000 recommendations has been made to these manufacturers across many end user sectors, as shown here in this bar chart. And recently, Cal IT2 has won the DOE IAC award led by Professor G.P. Lee. So we start to build this UCI IAC Center. Starting next year, we will assess more than 20 small and medium manufacturers and 10 commercial buildings every year. So in addition to the DOE IAC database, we will have this in-field observations that will help us to identify and overcome the challenges in various pathways of decarbonization for SMMs. If we look into the IAC database, the average implementation rate of all of the 150,000 recommendations is about 50%, and the average simple payback is 1.6 years. But when we dig into the data in terms of the electrification related recommendations listed here below, such as electric heating and use electrical equipment, the implementation rate are much lower than the average implementation rate. And more interestingly, the recommendations have a reasonable payback period compared to the average. So the data mining from the past assessment tells us the electrification barrier is more complicated for small and medium manufacturers and has more to do not just technology or economic. And that mainly because small and medium manufacturers are in a variety of industry subsectors and have their own process heating requirements and production cycles and have a high degree of process integration. And these features of small and medium manufacturers make the decarbonization more challenging. So leveraging our IEC and our smart manufacturing centers, we're trying to find the pathways to questions like, hey, what are the real barriers for small and medium manufacturers to decarbonize in each of the end-use sectors? Are these barriers mainly technical or economic or both? Is there any commonalities among technological approaches that works more effective? So these are the questions we can try to solve through this holistic approach and our IEC center effort. So from another perspective, our holistic approach is data-driven. It will use data and insights from plug and process flow to generate new business intelligence, new energy intelligence, and new carbon intelligence synergistically for small and medium manufacturers. The ultimate goal here is to develop economically and technically feasible decarbonization solutions that improve energy and operation efficiencies for small and medium manufacturers and commercial buildings. So at the end, I want to emphasize that holistic approach requires collaborative efforts. So plug and process flow, smart control, building automation, AI and their applications, distributed generation, energy storage, grid operation. These are all indispensable when we're moving forward. So we'll keep sharing our findings, our collaborations with groups and stakeholders, like the speakers and the groups participating in today's workshop. And also please pencil down April 2022 on your calendar for our next workshop that we will share more updates. And that will conclude my presentation. Thank you all for your time. And GP, I will turn this back to you.
Thank you, Lee, for outstanding presentation. I have a short question. You mentioned quite a bit of holistic approach to energy efficiency and electrification.
Mm-hmm.
And how would you address the user? You mentioned briefly about the user adoption, especially in a small and medium enterprise in manufacturing and also for small and medium-sized buildings, commercial building, and typical tenant renting the space from landlord. So there is a split interest. So how do you really address those user adoptions and to deal with those kind of a scenario?
Right. So user adoption, user experience. There are many photo pushbacks. So the first level is like, because the electrical replacement have like different working mechanism and provide not identical amenities as their counterpart, like direct field counterpart. So consumers sometimes avoid the electric replacement even the economics are favorable. And also this electrification introduced financial and operational costs, not only for the manufacturer, but like you said, like when they share the space in the large industrial park, it also concerns the owner of the property. So for this, how to address this, our holistic approach will try to provide manifolds of benefits or considerations, like, hey, the technical details and the benefits, to ease the informality of the technology, and we'll provide more ROI opportunities, including a optimal control and to avoid demand charge, because if electrification normally going to introduce some demand charge, like new demand charge or like higher electricity bills, like how we have solutions for those, like, hey, you may have larger or like skyrocket demand charts, but you also have an opportunity to have better demand response, and you may have like optimal dispatch strategies. So we will provide both the technical and economical and also the operational consideration to reduce the risk aversion of both the manufacturers and the owner of the shared building. Yeah, so the user adoption and the attitude are driven by a combination of things, and our approach is try to address those from like all the angles we could have, looking into the operation, looking into the not only the loads but their surroundings and their interactive with the grid and the local resources.
Thank you. Thank you. We need to move on. Thank you, Lee. Yeah. So it is my great pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Dr. John Anderson, who received his PhD from Stanford University in economics. And currently he's director of energy markets at the OhmConnect. John, please take it away.
Thank you, GP. Are you able to see my blue screen?
Yes.
Fantastic. Good morning, everybody. My name is John Anderson, and as GP said, I'm Director of Energy Markets at OhmConnect, which is a California-based third-party demand response provider. I have a background in economics and studied economics at Stanford University, but my presentation today is surprisingly non-technical, and I hope that will be insightful nonetheless. I've entitled it Smart Plugs, the Gateway Drug to Home Energy Automation, and I hope to tease your thinking here a little bit with some ideas for how we can tap some potentially low-hanging fruit to help with some of the challenges that California and other jurisdictions are dealing with. So I'd like to start this discussion by laying out a three-part problem statement. The first part is that flexible demand for electricity is needed to decarbonize the grid. And what I've shown here is a daily load and net load profile for the California ISO grid from the spring of this year. This is a version of the duck curve that I'm sure folks in this session have all seen before. It's showing both the load profile across the day as well as the load net of renewable energy generation. And that's what gives rise to this very steep afternoon and evening ramp. The solar starts to disappear, the yellow curve, right around the time that people are ending their work days and getting on with their evenings. And on this particular date in the spring of this year, we saw a 3-hour ramp of about 17,000 megawatts. And so if we are going to continue to add renewables to our grid, we are going to have to find a way to move some of this load out of this particular time of day and into periods of abundant renewables. And we're going to have to do that through some combination of policy and technology. The second part of the problem statement, though, is in order to get flexible demand at scale, we're going to have to do this through automation, through some significant automated control of household electric loads. As you can probably imagine, it is completely unreasonable to think that 17,000 megawatts worth of loads are going to sit around on standby and wait to take manual behavioral only actions, turning on and off switches, on and off appliances or processes in order to help address that net load ramp. We're going to have to do this through automated controls in significant part. The but here, part 3, though, is that many households face barriers to adopting energy automation technologies. And we're going to get into what these barriers are in a little bit more detail in just a moment. But the solution that I want to propose to this group today is that simple Wi-Fi smart plugs are going to be able to help us overcome a number of these barriers and thereby catalyze the flexible demand electricity we're going to need to decarbonize our grid. And in case you've never seen one of these little gizmos before, it's a simple inline plug. You can insert it into any outlet in your home. And in effect, whatever appliance you plug into this device becomes smart in the sense that you can control it, turn it on and off remotely over the internet using a smartphone, using your computer, or by setting a schedule. And what we have found in our experience as a demand response provider in California is these little things go a long ways towards addressing the problem statement we just spelled out. But of course, I'm going to take a quick detour for some shameless self-promotion of my business, OhmConnect. Again, we are a residential demand response provider that was founded in 2013, headquartered in Oakland, California. We are a free service to sign up. So if you don't like my presentation, at least take a moment to go check out our website and consider signing up if you live in California and helping out the grid. How we work is really quite simple. We essentially serve as a broker for residential customers in the CAISO market. You know, any residential customer in isolation is far too small to be a direct participant in CAISO. But when we aggregate up thousands and thousands of such customers, we can construct essentially a virtual power plant that responds to price signals and curtails load in much the same way that a regular generator would supply energy to the grid. So in effect, when we see a price spike in the wholesale market in CAISO, we dispatch our user base through a combination of automated and behavioral means. These users reduce their energy use. We measure their reductions using the smart meter data from their utility. We settle with the CAISO market and we pay out our customers in proportion to their energy reductions. Presently, we have about 185,000 residential customers in California who are active on our platform and enrolled in the ISO's DR system. They have earned to date about $15 million in payments for their saving energy. And we have very intentionally designed this process to be simple, customer friendly, and indeed mobile friendly. It's not an accident that the pictures I'm showing you here are showing a smartphone rather than a computer. People take out their device, they sign up in about 1 minute. They can connect a smart device like a smart plug in just a few minutes as well. They can start saving and earning energy right away and earning money or prizes for their cash outs. And one of the things that we are particularly proud of at OhmConnect is about a third of our customers are demonstrably lower income families. In the data that we receive from their utility, we see that they are on CARE or FERA rates, means tested low income assistance programs. And some of these customers are in fact our best demand response customers because the money that they can earn by saving energy in their homes is very impactful to their families. So I mentioned that we work with a variety of different smart devices, and of course OhmConnect is hardly the first company to try to incentivize home energy automation. You've probably seen all kinds of promotions like the ones on the screen here from various utilities across the country, oftentimes promoting smart thermostats. But the challenge that we've seen is that the entry point that a lot of these promotions are putting forward is for what I would say is a fairly complex and a fairly costly device, even after the smart thermostat rebates. And going back to the barriers that I mentioned a moment ago, there are quite a few reasons that households may be unable or unwilling to automate control of their home's energy usage. Perhaps the most obvious of these is the cost. Devices like smart thermostats or smart appliances in the home, smart water heaters, heat pumps, you name it, they tend to be expensive and they're just plain out of reach for a lot of families. Oftentimes, these smart devices also require that you own your own home. If you're a renter, you're not always incentivized or even allowed to install technology, even a smart thermostat. Your landlord might say, nope, not going to happen. And certainly you're not going to put in a hot water heater into a home that you rent if you don't plan to stay there for a long period of time. The installation of these technologies can also be difficult. Many people are unable to install them themselves. They need a professional, which again is time consuming and expensive. And I'll be the first to tell you, OhmConnect even has sold smart thermostats that never get connected to our platform. They sit on somebody's coffee table because they just can't figure out how to get the thing to work. Understandably, some families and some people are concerned about the security aspect of smart devices in the home. Turning over control of your entire home's HVAC system or its water heating or other energy systems uses in the house can be a little bit daunting, can be a little bit scary. And then finally, some of these smart devices belong to different competing ecosystems that are not always intercompatible. So you may already be locked into one particular ecosystem like Amazon Alexa or Google Home, or you may be reluctant to get into one of these ecosystems in the first place. And so when you put all these different barriers together, it's not surprising that there are a number of households that are resistant, at least to taking the plunge at an entry point of a smart thermostat or more complicated. But let's go back to that little inline Wi-Fi smart plug and let's think about how it can address each of these different barriers to home automation. Well, cost is an issue. These things are cheap. They retail for as little as $10. You can get them on Amazon. You can get them through the OhmConnect store. You can buy them at Home Depot. They're easy to come by and they don't cost you much money. And of course, you don't need your landlord's permission, at least I would hope, to plug an inline smart plug into an outlet in the home. So these things are readily accessible to folks that are renters and don't own their own homes. Installation as well is literally plug and play. You take the thing out of the box, plug it into the outlet, set it up with your smartphone, and you're ready to go in a couple of minutes. And we envision a future where we can actually ship smart plugs that are pre-provisioned out of the box, much like Amazon is doing now with some of its Alexa devices. Plug it into your home, it finds your Wi-Fi, it connects to your OhmConnect account, and you are literally participating in demand response out of the box. Security, I think, as well, is less of an issue. Control is limited, of course, to what is powered by the plug. So you're not turning over control of your entire home. You're turning over control of what you've plugged into the device, and you can start simple and get more complicated. So start with something like a fan, a light, and build up to something more complicated and more load reduction potential, like a window air conditioner. And then finally, with respect to compatibility, these devices, in many cases, have been designed to work with the majority of smart home platforms. So if you already have a particular ecosystem that you are committed to, the smart plug should be an easy addition. And if you're not already committed to a particular ecosystem, you're not locking yourself in by picking a smart plug. But what's really cool about these smart plugs is that they do more than just direct load control. They're not just a one-trick pony like a thermostat. In particular, they have scheduling and remote control capabilities that provide families with convenience and security on their homes. And what I want to share with you are some direct quotes from some OhmConnect customers. We recently ran a little contest of sorts where we actually polled our community of thousands and thousands of users and said, hey, tell us some of your smart plug hacks. In addition to using these devices to reduce your loads during demand response events when prices spike in the wholesale market, how else do you use these things in your home for fun or for convenience or for security? And here's a couple of the answers. So one of the folks told us they keep one connected to a bedroom space heater. And so they schedule it to turn on first thing in the morning, a little bit before they plan to get up, so they can conveniently wake up to a room that is nice and warm without having to run the furnace and heat the entire house when people are still in bed. Someone else said they use it as a bedtime reminder. They connect it to a power strip and a TV and a light source, and everything shuts off when it's time to go to bed, and that's their cue to hit the sack. And finally, here's a particularly creative one. Someone who said they connect their garage door opener to the smart plug. So when they go on vacation, they can power down the opener and no one's able to use a scanner and try to find a way to break into their home. When they come home, pull out the smartphone, turn the smart plug back on, and the garage door opener goes right back to working. So in many cases, we can leverage these other sources of utility, whether it's convenience or security, to help people understand that they can use these devices also to earn money by providing demand response. And so bringing us back full circle, smart plugs, as I mentioned, I think can be a catalyst for flexible demand in California and other places. And I want to share just a few statistics or general principles about how our customers with smart plugs compare to those without smart plugs. So customers who are behavioral only participants on our platform. What we've noticed after many years of running our business and just thousands and thousands of demand response events is that customers that have smart plugs connected to our platform are more likely to reduce load and reduce load by a larger margin than do customers without smart plugs when we have our demand response events. They're also more likely to take the plunge and connect more advanced technologies like smart thermostats to our platform. And that's why I opted to title this presentation, Smart Plugs, the Gateway Drug to Home Automation. Smart plugs are an easy entry point to get people comfortable with the idea of home automation and then to upsell them on ideas like smart thermostats and other smart appliances. We see a much lower drop-off rate or churn rate on our platform for customers with smart plugs. People who automate with OhmConnect and are able to put their participation largely on autopilot tend to stay with us for longer. They earn rewards, they see the value in participating in demand response, and they don't go cold on us. Similarly, they're more likely to refer friends and family members to the OhmConnect platform. If you're having a positive experience, if you're seeing the power of technology in your home, making you money, then of course people are inclined to say, hey, you should try this too. It's free, give it a shot. Finally, these customers are most likely to engage with the content from OhmConnect. So we send out regular emails, text messages, blog posts, and the folks that are automated, the folks that are heavy users of our platform and frequent participants in demand response tend to engage with this content And it's a two-way street, like I said. They respond as well to the types of surveys and contests that we put out for them to try to keep this a rewarding and fun experience. And so I think when you add all of these things together, you see that smart plugs really are a tool that we can use to attack the California duck curve and help us deal with the steep net load ramps and bringing flexible demand to California. Thanks, GP. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, John, for outstanding presentation. And so now it's a Q&A session. So I do have a question here. What kind of households or user appear to be most effectively motivated by this kind of program and message?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we found that different messages resonate with different people. And I think there's maybe 3 or 4 main personas that stand out. There are people who use OhmConnect primarily because they care about the environmental implications. They're trying to use less energy and use their energy during times of abundant renewables, and trying to reduce when they know prices are high and electricity tends to be coming from fossil generation sources. So there is a group of users that are motivated primarily by the environmental attributes. Then there's another group of users that are motivated primarily by the money that they can earn. Even though it may be $50, $100, $150 a year for some families, this is very meaningful. And for other people, they contribute it towards a cause they care about. They may donate it towards a charity. They may put it towards their kids' sports team. They may put it towards a church organization in their community. Number 3, there are technology folks out there who they love smart home and energy technologies, and any excuse to put those to work is something they want to get behind. And we try to tell people that this is an opportunity to get your appliances or your devices to pay for themselves or even pay you. Those are the 3 main ones I'd say that come to mind, are the environmental, monetary, and technology.
I got another question. Can you describe how you estimate the saving and reduction when a smart plug device participates in a DR program?
Sure. So there's 2 things we can do. When we settle with the wholesale market, we are paid for the load reduction that we achieve for the entire home, and relative to a baseline estimate of usage using a methodology specified by the California ISO. So when it comes time to pay our users, presently we are doing so based on their whole home's energy usage during a demand response event relative to what we estimate their home would have used. But what's interesting about some of these smart plugs is they actually have energy monitoring capabilities built into them. So some of the smart plugs can tell you how much energy the appliance that is connected to the smart plug is using, and in near real time. And we use that information for a couple of things. We try to provide insights to our customers about are they connecting the right appliances to these smart plugs in order to provide meaningful load reductions during demand response events. Because sometimes the most convenient application of the smart plug might not be consistent with the best load reduction potential. So people may like to connect, let's say, a lamp or a light to the smart plug because that's convenient. Having a light that turns on or off automatically is convenient. However, given the prevalence of LED lights in many of our homes now, turning off an LED light is not necessarily going to result in a significant load reduction when wholesale prices spike. So we might suggest to people that they consider connecting it to something else, like a space heater or a window air conditioner that also has a convenience element, but is likely to provide a larger load reduction during DR events.
So I have a more question here. For the example of $1 savings, how much money are you classify low-income users saving each year?
Yeah, I think the typical family is seeing earnings from OhmConnect on the order of about $100, maybe $150 per year, depending on a number of factors, of course. Where they live in the state is an important factor. People who live in the Central Valley, for instance, tend to have higher energy usage, larger homes and larger air conditioning loads, and therefore more potential to reduce loads and earn through our platform. But also people who are automated, who have smart thermostats or smart plugs in their homes, tend to provide larger and more consistent reductions and therefore earn more money as well.
And have you seen an increase in sign up during the pandemic when more are staying home? We're staying home.
Yes, we did see a bump during the COVID, during the lockdowns, and we tried to change some of our messaging around that as well to recognize that people were in their homes more and on the one hand, using more energy, but on the other hand, perhaps not as well positioned to reduce their energy usage as they may have otherwise been. We'd often encourage people prior to the pandemic that a good way to reduce loads would be power down your home and get out of the house, go for a walk, go to the park, go to the movies, go to the shopping mall. Some of those options were off the table during the pandemic. We had to be sensitive to that in terms of how we were messaging with people and making sure they were still in a position to be able to reduce their load successfully.
Another question here is, does your solution turn off a standby load as well?
Pardon me, could you say that again, the last part of the question?
So does your device turn off the load at the standby mode?
I'm sorry, GP, I'm not quite hearing the last part of the question. Does it turn off the load?
Does the smart plug turn off any load at the standby mode?
Oh, in standby,
So,
I see.
You could have a standby on, off, right? So 3 mode. So that was a question.
Right. I think if I understood you correctly, is it a binary response essentially? Is it on or off?
Basically, yes. Mm-hmm.
Correct. Presently it is, and we recognize that that's not always the most practical solution. So one example is if we have an event at nighttime, turning your lights off all the way off leaves you literally in the dark in your home, right? So a better solution longer term might be, well, can we power your lights from 100% to 20%? So you're using less energy, but you're still able to function in your home, able to walk around without crashing into things, able to tidy up, whatever needs to get done. The current generation of smart plugs, no, unfortunately cannot do that. It is a binary response, 0 or 1. But we are looking into some other solutions, including smart electric panels in the home that may be better positioned to provide a more continuous response that strikes the ideal balance between how much energy you're using and how much convenience you are foregoing.
So the last question from the audience, how would you scale this model to small and medium commercial buildings?
Yeah, it's a great question. And as I said, we market exclusively right now to residential customers, but we do have the occasional non-residential customer who has found their way into OhmConnect. And oftentimes the way that happens is somebody uses our service in their home and they say, all right, I get this, this makes sense, and I'm making some money. And so they sign up their business. They say, well, I've got a little restaurant, or I've got a hair salon or an auto garage. I'm going to sign those up for OhmConnect. And to date, they're using many of the same technologies in their businesses as they would in the home: smart thermostats, smart plugs. We are continuing to look into other sources of hardware that we can connect with, smart hardware that can provide either a binary or continuous response, like we just said. That could be more advanced lighting systems, more advanced HVAC systems, energy storage systems. And so I think many of those will be more appealing perhaps to larger business customers who think a little bit more perhaps about their energy usage, who think about the payback periods of investing in new technology, and can make those kinds of 5 or 10-year decisions perhaps a little bit easier than residences sometimes can.
Thank you, John. So it's time to move on. Thank you so much, John, for your outstanding presentation again. So I will see you later at the panel discussion. See you. Thank you. Take care.
My pleasure.
So it is my great pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Marianne Piette. I have known her for quite a few years, serving on ETCC Technical Advisory Board. She is a senior scientist and the director of a building technology and urban system divisions in the energy technology area at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. She also oversees Berkeley Lab's building energy research activity with the U.S. Department of Energy. And she is also the director of the Demand Response Research Center. Marianne, please take it away.
Thanks so much, GP. Can you see my slides okay? I assume you can. You let me know if you can. Great, thank you. Okay, so first of all, I want to thank GP and all the CalPlug staff for helping organize today's session. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate following the last two speakers. It was great to get the overview from Lee and hear from John about OhmConnect. It's an impressive innovation that's happening. I'm going to be talking about a new California Energy Commission funded research hub called the California Load Flexibility Research and Deployment Hub. And I'll be touching on some of our work related to the U.S. Department of Energy, as well as work related to the Demand Response Research Center and the Public Utilities funded DR Potential Study. So it's a very exciting time in this field. I'm going to start, let's see, get my slides moving here, by giving you an introduction to what CalFlex Hub is about. It's about using dynamic prices to try to create that load flexibility that John from OhmConnect was just talking about. So we know that buildings have a big capability, and John was focusing mostly on residential. I'll be talking about residential as well as commercial buildings. We are interested in pre-commercial technologies. So I'll be sharing with you some of the things that we're planning to do around identifying, evaluating, developing, and demonstrating these technologies in California. And one of the most important things is using standardized signals to communicate dynamic price and greenhouse gas information. And we'll also be focusing on load shaping demand response. And that's one of the differences between some of what I'll be talking about a little bit compared to what OhmConnect is doing, because we're going to be focusing on retail pricing and using that as the first line of defense for dynamic load shaping, but also considering the supply side demand response. So what you heard from OhmConnect is mostly on the wholesale side, and we're working on the retail side, but we need to understand how those interact. We need both. We need both wholesale and retail supply side and load shaping demand response. So as I mentioned, the concept is to create the future where building loads can receive a continuous price and adjust continuously. So today we're using mostly time of use pricing, occasionally real-time pricing. Critical peak pricing has been around. And we want to also explore the use of something called watt time, which is using greenhouse gas signals. So I'll talk a little about the California Energy Commission's load management standards later in my slide deck. But we want to use what are called grid-informed tariffs. The picture there is a picture of the duck curve, and that day is really interesting. That day was in May, Memorial Day in 2019, and 16% of the electricity we generated we could not use. So we know in the middle of the day, we often have really low cost clean electricity. And one of our challenges is to have prices that reflect those system conditions continuously. So we actually changed the way we run our dishwashers, we changed the way we run our air conditioners with pre-cooling, and maybe we want more things like thermal storage. I'll talk a little about plug loads and how they fit into this research. But the real idea is to have prices that reflect system conditions and to have devices that are responding to those prices. The CalFlex Hub has a broad set of partners, and we're looking at building owners, utilities, community choice aggregators, policymakers, hardware manufacturers, software manufacturers, disadvantaged communities. We want to make sure that the research we do is rooted in the practical needs and also getting out to the people that need to use that information. We also, as many California programs have, to understand what the equity implications are, because a lot of the technology we've developed has been most useful for disadvantaged communities. I'm sorry, most advantaged for more wealthy communities. And we want to make sure that the technologies are also being available to disadvantaged communities, tested in disadvantaged communities. And so one of the interesting things about the signaling that we're doing is we will not just be using the internet, but we will be testing the FM broadcast. So that's something that California's been thinking about for a long time. And you can literally send a signal over an FM radio to a device and do some automation based on FM signaling. So that's one of the technologies we'll be looking at as well. This is a quick look at a variety of the partners that we have in the program. We have a number of the University of California, UC Riverside, UC San Diego, UC Merced, UC Berkeley, and UC Davis, and we really need to include UC Irvine. So GP and I should follow up and talk about how to get UC Irvine involved in this activity. We have a number of technology companies, consultants, and some technology storage developers. So we have 16 partners that are in our paid portfolio, but 23 other partners that are testing the technology at their sites. And I'll give you a little bit of look into who those partners are. So I'm going to spend a few minutes on this picture here. This is the long-term vision for the California Energy Commission to create a public broadcasting system that uses time-varying rates and greenhouse gases. So the basic idea is the California Energy Commission has created something called MIDAS, which is the Market-Informed Demand Automation Server. And MIDAS is using a particular format for prices. You can stream TOU. Well, TOU doesn't need to be as real time, but you can still set up something that where devices are receiving these electricity prices from a CCA, from a utility, or from the California Energy Commission's own database. So the concept is that you would actually be able to have a standard way, and we produce all tariffs in a machine-readable format instead of today's rates, which are in PDFs. So we want to be able to send prices to devices, which is a concept that's been around for several decades. We also want to use the FM broadcast there, and we want to get those prices to homes, to EVs, to industrial systems. CalFlex Hub is focused on buildings, but we're also looking at some of the behind-the-meter EVs, and we want to look at both the electricity prices as well as greenhouse gases. And we're working with the Public Utilities Commission for their concept about dynamic pricing, as well as the state of California. And you're probably aware of something called SB 49. So the state of California is very interested in requiring that devices in the future, appliances, refrigerators, washing machines, heat pumps, be required to be able to receive a signal in a common format. So we're going to be doing some of the foundational research to think about what is required, and if we get these devices to buildings, what loads are capable of responding. This is an important piece of what we're doing. We have 12 projects, 12 technology projects that we're launching on day one of CalFlex Hub that's kicking off in November. Now on the left column here is customer building level benefits. So every year we'll be looking at all 12 projects and deciding which of those go forward into the future, and making sure that we're nimble. So this is a 3.5-year program. We're in green there are things that LBL is modeling, and E3 is one of our partners in turquoise. So we're looking at the ability of the loads to be flexible, the customer price response, electric bill impacts, customer bill impacts, building load shape impacts, customer cost benefits, non-energy benefits, and usability. And I think OhmConnect has really demonstrated how important usability is. Do people understand the user interface? So we'll actually be working with some social psychologists and behavior researchers to understand the usability. And then looking at the power system level. What are the uptake? What is the adoption potential of the technology? What are the system load shape impacts, the load flexibility potential? the avoided system costs, greenhouse gases, and cost benefits. So we have an evaluation framework. So every technology is going to be evaluated, and it gets considered for whether it's going to proceed to the following year. So we will change our portfolio and change the way we're emphasizing some projects versus others in an annual assessment process. Now I'm going to give you a quick look at some of the technology projects. The electric program investment charge has something that are called applied R&D and technology demonstration and deployment. So we have 6 that are more science, more in the lab, and these are those 6 projects. A project with UC Berkeley related to smart fans and thermostats, UC Davis looking at residential space heat, heat pumps and domestic hot water. So clearly we're looking at electrification technologies. We have work on small commercial, work on cold storage and heat pumps at SunAmp and RMEC are making thermal batteries, and we're really interested in the use of thermal storage, and not just electric storage, but thermal storage for that load responsive capability, which can be used less electricity than electric batteries. We're looking at model predictive control at large facilities, UC Merced, UC San Diego. And this very last one, A6, the home energy management panels. As a lot of you know, when we look at electrification, we're trying to minimize the need to upgrade the electrical panels, and we're going to look at the controls for doing load management within the home, so we can actually manage the electrification agenda with other panels, and the plug loads are going to be an important part of that. Now, these are the demonstration deployment projects. We'll be working with Extensible Energy and GridPoint with small commercial distributed energy resources, UC Davis and Villara and homes, hot water and HVAC with Harvest Thermal and East Bay Homes. We have some work with BMW and and bidirectional charging. And then this last one is working with some CCAs and some DERMS providers, looking at a variety of technologies and adding the load shaping, load response capability to things that are already in the field. So we'll be working with a variety of partners and vendors in load distribution and distributed energy flexible load projects. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of introduction into how this fits in with the demand response potential study that we've been doing since 2016. We've defined these 4 grid services: shape, shift, shed, and shimmy. You may have heard of these before. Shaping is responding to dynamic pricing. Shedding is your traditional hot summer DR. And it's very interesting to see OhmConnect create the shed capability, but also create the platform for energy management. So you heard from the testimonials how they would control things. So controls are a really important part of these technologies. When we shift, we don't really have a lot of shift in the market today, but we want to soak up some of that clean electricity and use less around dinner time. And there's a strong need for technologies that provide shift, like electric batteries or thermal storage, or maybe the building itself. So we also want this shimmy fast acting technology, but I'm not really looking at shimmy too much. That's for ancillary services. And we don't need as many megawatts in California of that, but it's very expensive, and building loads can provide some of that at certain times. So in the demand response potential study, we've been working on several phases of research around how many gigawatts and gigawatt hours are available in California at these different price points. So in 2025, we think there's about 2 gigawatts of building loads. This is not industrial. There's another 2 gigawatts of industrial, but about 2 gigawatts of building loads at about less than $200 a kilowatt of levelized cost. We've been trying to model what is available in the commercial sector and the residential sector. And we're now upgrading to what's called the phase 4 model. And I'll share with you how plug loads are in phase 4. So that's the main thing I wanted you to know, is we're doing more on modeling those plug loads, and it would be really great to work with this team of people to improve our modeling of those kinds of loads. So the basic idea is, how large is the shift and shed resource, and where is it? When we do these models, we had 300,000 electric load shapes from California customers and 11 million demographic files. In phase 4, we now have 400,000 load shapes, and we're creating a variety of clusters that represent common loads for residential, small commercial, large commercial, and industrial. So we're trying to really understand the size and the location of the resource. So finally, we know we need more of this shift, which John showed you the duck curve. I showed you something like that. So we want to drive down the cost to participate in providing flexible loads. This is what a supply curve looks like. I'm not going to go into the details, but we basically look at how many gigawatt hours are available for a particular price. And I have in there a dashed line, which is a battery reference. So anything cheaper than a battery is a real good investment in shift. So we have this 4 to 6 gigawatt hours of virtual storage. Electrification is super important because we're going to have, if we don't make heat pump water heaters and space heaters flexible, the duck curve gets worse. So we really need to look at how we make more flexible load out of it as we electrify, and the shift resource gets larger if we could have better participation, like the technologies that OhmConnect was providing. So we really want to have about, right now we have about 1% of the load can get us about reducing 50% of that overgeneration from the duck curve that we have today. So these reports are available at drc.lbl.gov, the Demand Response Research Center, and I will of course provide these slides to you and happy to follow up. This is a slide I wanted to spend a moment on. In red are the new end uses that we're including in the phase 4 potential study. So you'll see for residential and commercial, we now will be modeling PCs, office equipment, televisions, space heaters, and spa pumps, and clothes dryers. So these are all new, and we'll be looking at what load flexibility is available at these different end uses. So this is my final slide. And I actually, let me go back to this last one for a minute because I didn't explain the green. In phase 1 and 2, we modeled everything that was in black. And then in phase 3, we added the green. We added space heat and water heat in residential, but we didn't have electric space heat and water heat in commercial, which we're adding now. So in general, we're developing more capability to understand the end uses that are available for load flexibility by building type. So in the commercial sector, we now have dining and lodging and medical and education. So we're adding more robustness to the platform and creating a capability that we hope to use to be able to help the state develop policies and help the utility programs understand how to incentivize the load flexibility. So I'm going to summarize for a few minutes and talk a little about, at a big picture, what we're trying to do in the CalFlex Hub. The number one thing we're trying to do is to promote load flexibility based on price response, and that allows for decarbonization of the buildings grid. We want to use end uses that can respond to price signals. Most of the utilities are hoping that we use OpenADR technology that is celebrating its 20-year anniversary next year and is available for automating demand response today. We are considering the price data models and how to broadcast prices. Most of OpenADR today is a two-way technology, so we're exploring broadcasting prices using the internet and using a standard format, as well as these FM signals. So then we need to understand what is needed to retrofit a device to enable it to be able to listen to a price response. And where's the intelligence? Is the intelligence at the water heater? Is it at the cloud? Is it at the DERMS provider? The cloud may be a manufacturer or a DERMS provider. So we have a variety of these technologies, and we want to identify how to deepen the response. If we had thermal energy storage in commercial buildings, in residential buildings, you could cool the building and store heating or cooling, and then use less electricity during the dirty hours or the expensive hours. Normally, the expensive hours are the dirtiest hours. So we could take that low price electricity and be able to send an automated signal to devices and understand how to use both a price signal and a carbon signal. So we want to understand the ability to overcome the barriers to deployment, developing new technology, understanding usability, modeling the costs and the technical capabilities, and providing a portfolio of solutions. We've been for 30, 40 years doing energy efficiency, and it's been really exciting progress. But we're moving from a time from static energy efficiency to dynamic energy management. So we think of a building as a set of end uses that are dynamic: lighting, HVAC, plug loads, EVs. But we also need to understand what's happening in the building, the health of the people, the security, how the building integrates with other buildings on a campus or with the grid overall. So that's a quick overview of what we're doing. I will provide these slides, and I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in today's event and look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Marianne, for an outstanding presentation. And I want to remind all the audience, at the end of the workshop, we will have all the video as well as the PowerPoint presentation material available on the website for people to review them. And if they could not participate at today, they can also review all the presentation material. So Marianne, here is a question. Can you say more about how the challenges are different for disadvantaged community and how the strategy can be adjusted to better serve them?
Thank you for that question. The disadvantaged communities may not have the same technologies as the wealthier communities. So one of the technologies I didn't talk about is pool pumps. We actually are finding a lot of success in automating pool pumps, air conditioners. Maybe the disadvantaged community has a fan and not a full air conditioner. So they will have different devices in their home. They may not have an Alexa or a smart home platform to interact with. They may have a smartphone, but they may not have a whole home control device. So they'll have different devices, and they'll have different opportunities to engage with the automation. They may not have Wi-Fi. And that's why we're looking at things like FM broadcasts that could interact with a water heater, a heat pump water heater. So there are pilots going on with the utilities to try to explore how to work with disadvantaged communities. And we need to reach out to them and better understand their needs relative to this kind of technology.
Thank you. Another question is, right now, like the wildfire become one of the hot topic in California. How do you see your program can also provide some of the grid support to the community when they are forced to shut down their electricity usage?
Yeah, so, the concept of resilience, when we think about that word, there's a lot of different things we think about. And one is resilience to extreme heat. Another is resilience to power outages. Another is resilience to smoke. So when we think about a building and our community, these technologies allow you to actually run the building in an islanded mode on low power. So if you have some homes, some of the wealthier homes may have their own battery and their own photovoltaics, and they may be able to run their home in an islanded system. If they're doing that, they want to put all their devices into a low power mode. They may not turn their air conditioner up to full. Now a school can do the same thing. So we are very interested in community centers that can run in an islanded mode. And then the ability to, what Bruce Nordman, actually one of my partners, uses prices within a microgrid to communicate with devices. And if the prices are really high because there's scarcity, perhaps all your devices are running into a low power mode where prices are high. So there's just some thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have a more question, but we need to move on. So we will invite you back at the panel discussion session. Thank you, Marianne, for your outstanding presentation again. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's move on to the next speaker, Paul Campbell. And Paul is an energy data strategist experienced in enterprise energy decision management and data, velocity, and applied analytic. So Paul currently is a vice president of Facil AI. So Paul, please take it away. Paul, I think
sorry, I was muted. I was muted. I apologize. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, very good. Okay. All right, so I want to take a moment to introduce myself.
I think you have to put in the presentation mode. I can see your screen, but I cannot see the content.
Okay. Bear with me a moment. Okay, can you see now?
Not yet.
No, all right, bear with me. I must have overlooked something. I'm going to stop showing my screen. I'm going to just bear with me. Just got to get the right screen up. Bear with me. That is the wrong screen. Oh, I apologize. So here we go. That's the one I'm looking for.
Now I can see it.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. I apologize for that. I want to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Paul Campbell, and I have to confess straight away, I'm not an engineer. I'm an energy data strategist, and I've been a practitioner of enterprise energy management, decision management, and analytics for about 30 years now. And today's presentation illuminates the powerful influence of object-oriented design in energy and decision management. And you may recognize that term from computer programming. It's a powerful management paradigm. And it's my hope to convey that in today's presentation that one cannot manage energy without also managing decisions, and in particular, high volume, low amplitude decisions. It may surprise you to learn that 75 to 80% of all data science projects fail to make it into production. That is a data scientist, that's their chief frustration. And this failure is because the decision on what to do with an analytic has been left unattended. So one of the takeaways I hope we come away with today is that business understanding is foundational to developing a fully automated decision management system to handle analytic signals traffic. And I'm going to confess also that today's presentation is a furtherance of a presentation I made about 2.5 years ago at the Association of Energy Engineers Conference in Boston. I co-presented virtual closed-loop control for adaptive energy management retail buildings with Keith Gibson, who's Facil CEO now. And that presentation was based on a white paper I wrote to contextualize the relative imprecision of building automation systems based on open-loop design, and that also the control systems based on simplified PID loops are incomplete relative to closed-loop control. Without closing the loop, without a full expression of error correction, precision can never be achieved, certainly over a large enterprise like a retail environment. So the connection to object-oriented design is that a virtualized negative feedback in virtual closed-loop control is a class of object, which is a central theme to object-oriented design, and it's foundational to advancing from just automation to actual control. So today's topics, we'll just cover a little bit of ground here. We'll go into control types. We'll compare open and closed loop control. We'll briefly touch upon PID loops and the false promise of simplifying PID loops as a tactic for market penetration. Then we'll go into virtual closed loop control, its context and application. They will spend a chunk of our time on the influence of object-oriented design in terms of energy management. An example of that is what we internally call extreme tagging. Then we'll get into decision management. We'll get into decision as a class of object. Then we'll move to an object workflow and the importance of speed to decision. And then we'll wrap up with the cross-industry, what's called CRISP-DM, the cross-industry process for data mining. So you may recognize this diagram, the open loop control diagram, and I want to. When I first got into this line of work, I had to be reminded that control theory cannot be applied to building automation systems that are based on open loop design, as they have no feedback loop. And in fact, it's not a feedback loop at all. There is no feedback loop at all, and it has no facilities to recurse. So you have an input and ultimately an output with no bias management. So what we're limited with are automation systems that can control schedules and set points as elements of configuration, but it's not true control as recognized by control theory. Closed loop control, alternatively, is well, it's not commonly found in applications in the retail sector, where much of my work has been done. But it does recurse and it does return bias as an input to influence set point, but it is relatively rare among common applications. It may help you to think of a loop in terms of a coded loop in Python or R, as you can see how vital recursion is to precision and ultimately accuracy of output. So, in mission-critical and life-preserving applications, PID loops are the vehicle of choice to drive error towards zero. So you find PID loops in controllers in nuclear facilities, for instance. But they are highly specialized. They require a very exacting degree of sensor calibration and take exceptional effort to tune. And as a result, PID loops will not be in a negative feedback in those rare closed loop control systems that may be found in retail facilities. I've never found one in a retail facility, so I would suggest that there is any. It's highly rare. But please note that there are three elements for our takeaway here, that there are three elements to error correction. There's the proportional, or the amplitude of the error. There's the integral, how it performs over time. And then there's the derivative, the slope of the curve. Those three elements are vital to any error correction. Okay, and this illustration shows how a PID loop would recurse with the negative feedback of a closed loop system in a highly engineered application to achieve the full expression of error. And hope you would note that the gains on each of the proportional, integral, and derivative elements are returned to the loop as a control input. But you can imagine handling each of those three elements would take a rather extraordinary effort. And just want to point out that you may recognize this from high school math, that the limit of a function as it approaches zero is zero. That's what a PID loop is trying to achieve. And I did indicate in the slide with the contents that subjects that we'd be touching upon. There is there are cases where there are closed loop systems out there, but they, in a way, to penetrate a market, they only attack the amplitude of the error, which is instantaneous. It doesn't rate its slope. It doesn't rate its performance over time. So there is a false promise associated with that. So if we do find this an environment where there are less rigorous engineering environment that it could be employed in, we can safely assume that one of the elements is only being included in the error correction. But the input that it returns would be an imprecise error solution and would not substantially close the performance gap with closed loop control. So in terms of virtual closed loop control, you recognize the top element looks like open loop control, but what we're looking to do with virtual closed loop control is that through a machine learning mechanism, we can provide the bias back to the open loop controller, thereby virtualizing the closed loop, a true recursive loop. The immediate effect is that it restores the proper role of set point as an output as opposed to an input, which is commonly held belief by those who work with open loop systems. And by doing so, the machine learning will provide the tuning mechanism to achieve accuracy in your output. So by positioning the algorithm at the local advanced supervisory control hardware, we obviate latency as a inhibiting factor. And the connection to object-oriented design, which is our larger theme today, is in its essence that this loop is nothing more than a type of automated decision that we just map out in advance. Okay. Now, while we focused on volume and velocity, I don't want to overlook variety in today's presentation. So by introducing additional data and parameters, a full suite of bias management machine learning algorithms and a feedback loop affecting other functions within a facility's proper order of operations quickly intensifies the potential of virtual closed loop control. The implications of relentless bias management and actual control is one of geometric proportion for facility and energy management over an entire enterprise. Now, virtual closed loop control does require a strategic vision to project as a force multiplier to meet energy efficiency, adaptivity, and ultimately resiliency objectives. And now we'll move into object-oriented design, and I hope this doesn't seem far afield in terms of energy. I think I will effectively make the connection here, but it's object-oriented design is, I think it's safe to say it's an underappreciated, perhaps undervalued outside of the software industry, but it deserves to be recognized as a fundamental exoskeletal structure of energy management. So for purposes of today's presentation, I'm going to be less focused on the four pillars, which is really that is driven by the software industry, and I want to direct your attention to object and class of object. These two elements play a critical role where energy management intersects with data. And so with that, knowing the object and class of objects, we must absolutely know the nature of the source devices that the data are describing to us. Our gateway technology is the fulcrum to our categorical understanding of devices in the field. You may have heard the term edge devices. That's ultimately what we're looking for. And our knowledge of their performance is informed by those data. So this knowledge makes distinct the type of device we're dealing with and informs us of its expected order of operation and therefore directs our downrange decision making. Vehicles that apply these categorical distinctions are tags, which are discovered by our gateway technology, which then normalizes the commonly found freehand text that gateways may discover. Systems integrators often use their own taxonomy, and that can be difficult to wrangle. So we can take advantage of and avail ourselves of any and all standards and naming conventions. You may have heard of Haystack or BRIC. Those are the two cheap industry standards. And doing so, we could stay true to an object-oriented, completely extensible infrastructure. We refer to it as extreme tagging, but I think tagging is a pretty well-established and powerful vehicle. But undergirding that is, the practice of object-oriented design, because it conveys to us not just the object, but the class of object. Decision management notation is the recognized standard for mapping decisions. Documents, knowledge sources, and decisions within the context of object-oriented design are classes of objects. So I think it's fair to say that decision management is a specific use case of object-oriented design. More broadly, object-oriented design is a powerfully strategic management paradigm. And if one could objectify features or tasks within the program of decision management, then it would simply be a matter of calling upon these objects and sequencing orders of operation to meet the objectives and decisions within an energy management program. Decision management and energy management are two sides of the same coin, and they are inseparable. And at times, that can be difficult to convey to people who practice energy management. They don't often recognize that they're making decisions on energy, and the two really need to be viewed in the same context. So we'll spend a moment here on speed to decision. There's a phrase in professional analytics circles that indicates that the tub must drain at the same rate that it fills. The idea is you don't want your analytic work product just piling up and going nowhere. It needs to have a purpose and an endpoint. So when it comes to automating high volume, low amplitude decisions, analytics objects must never come to zero velocity. That is an absolute. The expectation of an analytic object is that it will make a full transit to its decision point without interruption, or else the analytic object and all the resource support required to surface it will suffer an erosion of value. So an example of this in practice would be, just think about how many insurance claims are processed through decision management paradigm. It's extremely common now. It's only the more complex decisions when the routine material is processed, very quickly and very automatically. And if you were to think of this object workflow in terms of classes of objects, each having a potentially unique recursive workflow loop, you can, I think you well understand how important business understanding is to any data science endeavor. Stakeholders or partners in any data science project, even if they are internal colleagues, that is something that gets lost quite often, actually, tragically. But the critical thing for this presentation is that the analytic is navigated, and I used a passive voice intentionally. It's navigated through this workflow to its terminal point without interruption by a decision that's already been mapped in advance. This uninterrupted workflow maximizes the value of the analytic because the analytic is not waiting for someone to decide its disposition. And this is the cross-industry standard for data mining. It's been around for 25 or so years. But if you research why, there was 75 to 80% of failed data science projects, why they don't make it into production, by far the most common feature is a lack of business understanding. So it gets lost, among the first steps. Getting acceptance from business stakeholders is the most important element in any data science related endeavor. And it may take a moment to see this, but what you're looking at is a variation of closed loop control. This is a series of feedback loops. It's a little bit nested, but this is no different than the closed loop diagram I showed earlier. But the key takeaway for our presentation today is that business understanding is the first input, and understanding decision making is critical to any successful endeavor. And that concludes my presentation. KP, if you want to take it away.
Oh, thank you for excellent presentation. I do have a question here. The first question is, how does object-oriented design improve user experience? We understand the decision-making process, but how do you really improve user experience in this data approach? Okay,
so I'll go to my experience with national retailers. Their work is divided by some procurement activities, some capital expense activities, and then there's some life cycle cost accounting type activities. And so if they can understand the decisions that they make and how that in fact impacts those three categories, and there are probably a few others I'm overlooking, but if they can understand how their decision management in the practice of energy management can help improve life cycle. Let's say if they can get another year out of a rooftop unit that cools part of one of their buildings. And if you can cascade that across an enterprise of, say, 500 or 600 facilities, that does have some budgetary improvement. The user experience is actually on the business side, so it's not customer facing so much. It's in the practice of energy management. So I don't want to have anyone be disappointed that there's no user at the end of this, but the objective from the energy manager's perspective at a retailer is to keep their customers comfortable and to optimize an environment for sales.
Yeah. So another question is this kind of strategy for building optimization. It would be new to many building owners and facility managers. So, and they may not fully understand, like what you pointed out, and so you need to explain and convince them before they get buy-in. So, what is that the process need to go through to really get their buy-in?
Okay. So if I was to look at their open loop control systems, where let's say your air conditioning, you have a set point, you have a temperature, and there's no correction. So there's going to be some variability against the set point. The actual performance is going to vary from the set point, and there's no facility to correct that. And I mentioned it's kind of a misunderstanding. Those who work with closed loop control forget that control theory no longer applies, and they think that you'll hear phrases like set point compliance, which is nice, but set point is the lever that you use to achieve particular temperature. So the question really needs to be reconditioned. How close to set point are you, or your target temperature? If you re-engineer the phrase you're looking at, you can achieve better precision and more accuracy through some sort of closed loop facility. So if you were to take a larger analytic view of that and just look at where their sales perform better and where they tend to not perform better. There's probably, and I have not done this, I have to confess, but I bet you there is some correlative strength to sales lagging and temperatures, straying away from the intended set point. That can be a difficult sell, I have to confess. But the fact is, they don't have a facility to help improve the performance of their building control systems. The building control systems, I should say building automation systems, do a very good job of enforcing set points and schedules. And so the edge devices are configured. Their performance is very strongly influenced by the automation system, but closed-loop control helps the automation system perform better. The automation system's internal hardware is not looking at its own performance. That's kind of what we hope to achieve with the energy managers.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again, Paul, for your excellent presentation. So thank you. At 10:40.
Hello?
Hi, Mike. So we will start at the 10:40.
Yes. All of a sudden, I lost you, and I'm like been frantically. I couldn't hear anything. So can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Great. Okay, I'm back in. Yes, I knew we weren't great, but I was like using this time. So anyway, I'll pause. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I see you. Okay, that's a start.
I apologize. I think I'm listed in here as a guest, not a panelist. I'm not seeing where I can share my screen. I apologize. I think I need to. Yep.
Chris, are you there?
Yeah, GP, I just made a presenter.
Yeah, so he said he could not share his screen.
Thank you so much, Chris.
No
My
problem.
apologies. I'm ready to go. Apologies.
Oh, so it's okay now?
Hopefully you're seeing my title screen.
Okay, so let's start. Okay, welcome back to the second half of the 18th CalPlug workshop. So the next speaker is Michael Myer. Mike is a researcher at Pacific Northwest National Lab, where he has worked for the past 14 years and has a vast experience in the field. So Mike, please take it away.
Thank you. And please message me if you can't see the screen. So thank you. My name is Michael Myer. I'm going to be presenting on some recent field experience and lessons learned really related to controlled automatic receptacles. I also do not only commercial building integration, I also focus on energy code work. I thought it was just a kind of a quick kind of summary of where we are. So most of the three major energy codes are represented here in the screen. You have ASHRAE 90.1, IEC, and 2019. And really, over the last 10 years, one code or another has had some level of automatic receptacle control. We see IECC adopted it most recently in this last version. So most of the country is actually represented by a code that does require automatic receptacle control. However, this data comes directly out of CVEX, Commercial Building Energy Consumption Survey of 2018. You'll see what I've highlighted here in 3 different places. You'll see that plug load control actually represents a very small portion of energy saving measures that you might see in a building. Yet lighting scheduling and and occupancy sensors represent a significant portion of buildings, and yet we don't see that for plug loads. And you'll notice over the right, lighting scheduling and occupancy sensors can be used to do plug load control. The concept is very similar, turning off devices when the space is either unoccupied or scheduled to be unoccupied. And yet we see a very low uptake. Now, some of that could be code, but there's a lot of user feedback and user experience that I'm going to highlight in this presentation of why we see such a difference in penetration. So as I showed 2 slides earlier, I showed that, hey, most of the country is represented by a different energy code that adopts it. So this is from roughly a snapshot from about a year ago of the 2020 automatic receptacle control adoption. So this is a map of the United States, obviously, color-coded different things. So green is where they have an active receptacle control requirement. Yellow is an alternative path. So that means, and you'll see an example of that in a second, they might require controls, but they don't require you to use it. You have another option of something more stringent from a different technology that you can use. You'll see the pink. These are states that have adopted an energy code, but for some reason chose to exclude the automatic receptacle control component of the code they adopted. Then you have the light gray and the dark gray. The light gray is a home rule state, and the dark gray is a code which prior to adoption, meaning that they're referencing a previous version, maybe IECC 15 or 90.1 2007, though I think no one does that anymore. But what you can see is across country we have a mixed usage, but the real takeaway is there's some resistance to automatic receptacle control. Here's just a sample from the Oregon State Energy Code. So they require, again, the standardized requirement that spaces, offices, conference room, classrooms have a control requirement where 50% of the controls turn off when the space is unoccupied. You can do it in many different ways, but then they give you 3 options to not comply with it. So if you want to be more stringent in using the building modeling approach, which is section 11 or appendix G if you're familiar with the codes. That means you have to be about 5% building, 5% better building. If you do about a 3% better performance on your envelope, or your lighting package is roughly a 5% better than code minimum, you don't have to use those control requirements. So quickly showing you over here on the right, you'll see that in a 20,000 square foot office, if you have this much power of 0.64 watts per square foot, which is what's allowed, you multiply that by the area, and your lighting allowance is about 12,800 watts. Now, if you don't want to do controlled receptacles, you have the option, but you can only install 12,160 watts to get around that controlled receptacle. My first question is that sufficient enough to not let people use controls? I'm a little on the fence. I think that they need to be more stringent, since we know that controlled receptacles are really important, which is kind of why we're all here today. But we're seeing codes, I think, not truly value or value the energy usage and energy savings from the controlled receptacles. Why they need to be managed. This is a pretty interesting paper. Over in the black, you'll kind of see what it is. So in a normal building, 25% of energy seems to be right now is plug load. That's in a minimally code compliant building. And then I just recently was involved in a zero energy construction project, and there the plug loads are even more significant. And that actually makes sense, because in zero energy buildings, they're really working to make the building extremely efficient. And that's what we're seeing kind of in the industry across the board. We're seeing buildings become more and more efficient at the lighting and the mechanical and the envelope. And as a result, that plug load usage is only going to increase as a percentage of the building. So the key thing here is we need to be serious. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think it's good just to touch base on how significant this load can be. And again, some of the challenges that we need to focus on making it more manageable. So this is just a quick example from Tinker Air Force Base. You'll see some more of these examples. You'll see Tinker Air Force Base throughout the project. The blue dots here is the baseline period. The red dots here are when the controlled plugs were installed. So it's your post evaluation. The image on your left are your controlled plugs, and the image on your right are your uncontrolled plugs. Now here they're doing just kind of a standard occupancy driven schedule where after 5 p.m., the occupancy sensor will turn off the plugs if there's no detected movement. And you can see on the left doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Blue line, blue line, blue line. Then all in the red, you can see all those dots dropping down to 0. That's showing that pretty much across the board, those loads are doing exactly what you want, and the uncontrolled plugs is your control, showing you that it's not happening. Could this have been done more effectively with just a standardized time clock versus occupancy? Maybe. Some of those dots on the left in the middle of those days, those are weekends and other days where there was abnormal scheduled behavior, kind of suggests that a time clock would have been some problematic. But it shows how controlled receptacles are supposed to work and why we want them. The next slide, though, shows some of the challenges we have. Humans, they can thwart controlled receptacles. So on the left, again, you're seeing the controlled plugs. Blue dots are at the baseline. The red is the post evaluation. On the left is the controlled plugs, and on the right is the uncontrolled plugs. There's 2 takeaways from this figure. One is the y-axis. On the left-hand figure, we're talking kWh, so the energy, but we're in the decimal. Over on the right, we're seeing the kWh in whole numbers. So the challenge we have is that humans choose which receptacles they use, and that's something we have to manage. Hey, if they know that receptacle is turning off, they might be actually opting to use higher wattage loads, which could save energy in the uncontrolled receptacles. The other thing you can see over on this image on the right, and unfortunately this happened, was notice those red dots actually tick up. So somewhere in the middle of this evaluation period, either more equipment was brought on or some other things happened, and load actually increased on the uncontrolled receptacles. Highlights why you really do need an on-site champion. This is not just a technological solution. There's humans play a critical role in if we're going to go after this technology. We need people to remind them, saying, hey, you got to think about that new device you plugged in. Could it go in the controlled receptacle? Periodic checks. That zero energy project I did, I think about every month or every 3 months, they do an actual evaluation just to make sure that that load is trending the way they need it to maintain their zero energy status. So we need to figure out a way that humans can be a champion without being a burden or badgering people about their controlled receptacles. The other challenge we have with controlled receptacles is the installation. So in this case, this is an Air Force base. They went with wireless receptacle controls. So the idea here is you have an occupancy sensor in the light fixture, and it's communicating to the receptacle in the wall. They did about 15 receptacles, and about $160 of that material was just the cost of material. But this required 2 different firmware updates, delayed the whole schedule by about 3 months, and added almost $550 in labor. And that's going to be a challenge that we're going to have to think about if we are going to adopt controlled receptacles. You can do this without doing a wireless, but as we get smarter technology, and I think the earlier presentation by John mentioning, kind of shipping these things ready to home devices, it's easier to manage firmware, it feels, at the home level versus at the commercial level. Your IT security tends to be tighter and stronger at the commercial level, who can actually do certain things. So firmware updates is actually a big thing that we need to think about, how they're going to happen, who's going to do them, how we're going to push a node or push a download to those devices. And they may be sporadic, we may not know exactly when it's going to happen, but that is a challenge. While this is the wireless receptacle, at one of the other projects I had, they just meant only half the receptacles in the office to be controlled receptacles, but the electrician wired it slightly incorrectly. And so because of the way the room was wired, every receptacle that was downstream of the controlled receptacle became a controlled receptacle in the room. So you can still have human and installation errors regardless of whether it's wired or wireless. But again, I think this is something that, while it sounds simple, just a simple on-off controlled receptacle, it's definitely something we need to manage of how they're being installed, and that firmware, especially for anything smart, is a bigger issue as time goes on. So here's some of the quick energy savings across 6 projects. You'll see we did 5 in Minnesota, a university, an outpatient/gym facility, a Department of Transportation, a traffic center, and another outpatient center. And then this Air Force Base is the 6th site. The energy savings are mixed. You'll see 3 or 4 of them are saving 50–60% energy. That's a great story. However, 2 of them only saved 0. We couldn't actually verify any savings as a result. Now, there are different reasons for that. One is we did find some integration issues. 2, those humans play a huge role. If they unplug things after we plug them in, kind of defeats the whole point of the devices. The other thing that's worth noting is that while these percentages are significant, and especially compared to some of the other reports that I've seen documented, which typically say 20 to 30%, we're saying well over that. Notice the kWh values at the top of the columns. So even though there's a number of sites here and they're saving the 50 to 60% energy, the actual energy itself is not as significant as we'd like. And this is over a number of receptacles. So for instance, that DOT facility, I believe 7 or 8 receptacles just to save the 774 kilowatt hours on an annual basis. The Tinker Air Force Base is 14 receptacles for that 25 kilowatt hours. So the challenge is that while the percentage may be high, the actual kWh is low. And that's, again, something that's hard to deal with. And why is that hard to deal with? Is costs. Costs seem to make no sense. Now, this was all pre-pandemic, before supply chains became a thing that we talk about every day. But you'll see in the maroon color here, the 5 sites to the left of the dashed line, those are all in Minnesota. Those are all basically the same vendor, and they're all actually within the St. Paul, Minneapolis area. So really 1 or 2 maybe electrical distributors. They are different electrical contractors, but they are all actually buying the same vendor products that will ultimately get installed in these fixtures. Yet notice the cost disparity in those maroon columns. There's really no justification why the St. Paul receptacles cost 1/3 what the University of Minnesota receptacles cost. Again, same time period, same location, same material, yet costs will way all over the place. One of the other challenges that we have, as I just mentioned on the previous slide, is while a number of these receptacles can save a high percentage of energy, they may not save that kWh, which makes monetizing this and making a cost-effective payback really hard. Many of these projects had over 100-year simple payback. I really like the idea that John suggested of a receptacle that's shipped directly from the manufacturer and that can be really brought online. And that works well at the residential level. And we know how it works at the residential level. But at the commercial level, you're dealing with electricians, commercial grade equipment, and commercial IT networks, which makes things more complicated. And that's some of the challenges we're having in recouping these costs. And that's, again, something we have to deal with. Beyond that, again, keep going back to the humans, we do have some challenges here. So in the image on the left, This was a flyer guidance provided to the vendor, the site. You'll see a lot of information. The key takeaway is that in this piece of paper, the green one, which was the bottom, was the controlled receptacle, and the top is the uncontrolled receptacle. The image in the middle is just a blow over that image, and you can make out how they use the word controlled. That they engraved that. The image on the right is how the receptacle was installed on site. Notice the arrow I show. What happened was they installed it 180 degrees, and you can tell by the ground pin. So now we were left with, did the user follow the instructions, or did they choose to opt out and not use the controlled receptacle thwarting the system? So again, how we're marking these and the user confusion is definitely a challenge we're going to have to manage with this technology. Here's another example. So this again is a question of how much is too much information. So the first two on the left, you just saw a flyer that was in your office, and then you can see the controlled receptacle in the center. The one on the right, imagine this being under your desk where you're trying to get in there to plug something in. That's a lot of information that you have to figure out. Well, which one's the receptacle? Which one's the controlled one? Which one I want to use? Is it really even important to know the time period and the duration? Also, they're put on with Scotch tape. How long will those last? So again, the battle of managing the amount of information is critical. Another challenge we have is these receptacles look very similar to GFCIs. So the image in the center is again the same receptacle you're seeing on nonstop. The information sheet we gave to them. Then notice the image on the right. Notice they both have green LEDs. They both have what appears to a layperson as a reset switch or a power device is what they should have. However, the one in the center is a controlled receptacle. The one on the right is a GFCI. Users, do they really know which one to use? How can we avoid some of these problems? You know, the technology can work, but there's a lot of human challenges that we have to deal with to really make the mark in this technology. So this is again, same Minnesota project. This one's the University of Minnesota. These are 6 different photos from 6 different offices. First thing, the crate, they're all the same color. So how do I know which one's the controlled receptacle and which one's not is a permanently switched receptacle? And you can kind of see how I laid them out in each photo. So of these 6 different installations, only 1 or 2 of them is actually using the controlled receptacle. And again, we can provide information, but if they plug it in after we leave or something else, it thwarts this whole technology. The other challenge we have is, notice how the Ethernet ports in these 3 bottom images are orange. I don't know what exactly it is. I don't know if that's an internal network or a printer network or so on. But the IT network used color to differentiate. Why didn't the controlled receptacle use something, anything, to help people understand which one's the controlled receptacle, which one's not? So again, this is a thing we need to focus on, is how we're marking and communicating this information to the general public if we're going to get greater uptake of this technology. You're sensing a theme here. So this is just a quick sampling of all the different electrical, or not all, many different manufacturers and their markings. The National Electrical Code requires you to mark it that it's controlled and that little symbol, but they don't talk anything about contrasting colors. The second one on the top from the right, notice they actually embossed it with the power symbol, but I don't know if that's the top or the bottom. And if I have any really eyesight problems, I may not even see that at all. Similarly to the 2 on the bottom, you can barely tell which one's the controlled one. So here's the challenge, is that if we want users who are generally lay people how to use this technology to understand and quickly do it, we need to be consistent and simple, such as contrasting color, consistent indication, like the top center one where the diagram is around the controlled receptacle. There's no question which one it is, unlike some of the other ones. And we need to get the industry to kind of say, okay, this is going to help us increase the penetration of this technology. So summary, code adoption is out there for controlled receptacles, but we have limited success. Some of that is code just adoption cycles, but also some are just outright cutting it out. And that's something that has to be addressed. The alternate options for controlled receptacles, they may not be sufficient enough considering how much the controlled receptacles are as a building load. We need to really put some more teeth and make that a harder lift if someone's going to opt out of this technology if we want to be successful. As I said, at this point, I'm a lighting practitioner by trade. Now we're starting to see plug loads becoming much greater than even lighting loads. So this is the load to start really focusing on, and that's why it needs to be more important. Humans are always the problem. They can thwart it after you installed. definitely need some type of on-site champion. So that's how we need to think about this technology rather than just install it and leave it. Savings are mixed. We can see some high percent, but low kWh, and that directly makes cost recovery very hard. And I don't understand why the wide variety in costs for materials, and that's something I'm seeing in other technologies as well, and that's something that needs to be solved. Installation error and confusion error have to be thought through, make these be simpler and easier to use devices. Finally, better methods of communicating to occupants, and then ultimately, standardized and better markings on the receptacles themselves. So this is just something I've seen from the last 3 to 4 years across 8 to 10 different projects. Here's my contact information, and look forward to any of your questions or any feedback.
Thank you, Mike, for outstanding presentation. So I have a question here. Your talk is clearly show the great evidence that we need more user experience studies done on controlled outlet design. Were any done before, or if so, what did they show?
So actually, it's great that you asked this question. I'm working with some colleagues at the National Renewable Electrical Laboratory, and that's actually one of the things we are trying to do. We're trying to outreach directly to manufacturers on this type of information, what type of labeling is most effective, and how we can get greater uptake by industry. There have been 1 or 2 studies, but I don't have the information readily available of who did them, but the results are mixed. Even by organizations that are expert in controlled plugs, they've been confused by which ones to use. So this is a growing problem with the technology.
Thank you. Thank you. What are some ways that state regulations can improve compliances with a control receptacle requirements? As you show, right? So anything we can do in the state level and like a CEC.
Yeah, well, so it's hard to say what can you do, because at a code level, when I work on energy code, they say, well, what they do is if the national code says you need 4 controlled receptacles in that office, and the energy code says 2 of them have to be switched, ways they get around that is they just install 7 or 8 receptacles. They just increase the number of non-switched receptacles, so that way there's more opportunities. So they met the code on paper, but in practice, the building occupants never have to use it. I don't think we can say don't install more receptacles. So that's one challenge, is how do we get around electricians and building designers installing receptacles, which at the end of the day are pretty cheap. However, they can affect the panel design. So that's something to think about, is how can we affect it at that level. Other things, I definitely think limiting the carve-outs for controlled receptacles. Also really pushing on maybe think about what appliances really should be on a controlled receptacle, or look at or appliance standards. As our monitors have gotten more efficient, and with first LED and now sleep timers, some technologies may not be as good on a controlled receptacle anymore, or not. And then I'm working on some other programs, and medical devices are definitely a place where those devices have no sleep function at all. So that would be a place of, I think, state agencies could look at what devices are not being touched right now, and how can they drive people to make more efficient or sleep-ready high-power devices.
Here's another question. Do you have any solution to reduce or eliminate standby load?
Definitely no solution. I mean, standby load on some levels is really important because it reduces the warm up and the boot up time. I do look for the appliance standards and other programs to really push down on standby load. I mean, ultimately, if something's only drawing half or less than half a watt, that's kind of okay, because ideally it's using that power for some other reasons. So I don't think standby load itself is bad. I do very much support testing procedures and appliance standards and other programs that are really pushing down on standby load.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
And so we need to move on. So I will see you later at the panel discussion.
Looking forward to it.
Yes. So it is my great pleasure to introduce the last speaker for this morning, Kirk Gerbudak. Gerbudak. And Kirk is a solution architect for Schneider Electric's building business since 2015. Kirk.
Okay. All righty. Well, wonderful. Well, thanks everybody. I'm really, GP, really, glad to be part of this discussion today. Let me give you a quick introduction on who I am, what I do. My name's Kurt Gerbudak, and by way of background, currently I'm a solution architect for Schneider Electric. I've been doing this for 9 years. As noted, I'm a mechanical engineer, and in the arc of my career, I've had the opportunity to do a lot of different things. I've been a building automation contractor, I've been a consulting engineer, I've been a building automation system programmer. So I've lived my life in the smart building industry for a very long time. I consider myself right now, I'm an evangelist of smart building technology. And I really believe it's the way to help drive all of us towards a more sustainable, greener future. As I'm talking about things today, I want to, really just walk through a few points that we feel are important things to think about as you look towards the implementation of smart building technology. And certainly controlling plug loads is, part of the last mile of ensuring that we've got good control of everything. So let me talk for a second about really what we see as, in the research that we do as a company. We do business all around the world. Events of the past 18 months, who could have foreseen in February of 2020 that, gosh, in March 2020, we'd all start working out of our home and get compliant and familiar working with Zoom and WebEx and Teams and whatever video platform of choice. It's a new way that we do things, but the truth, as we come out of the pandemic, forecast, and as we look at what's going on in our world is going through a recovery. And as we look at reducing carbon, limiting energy use, an undeniable truth is those are all goals that we want to drive towards. That's also balanced against the fact that our global building stock is continuing to increase. It's projected that by 2029, we'll add another 200 million square feet of office space. So yes, we want to reduce our energy footprint, but ours is a growing world. So why do we think what we're doing is important? A reality of what we do right now, and I'm guessing if you're attending this conference, you're probably consume the same Kool-Aid that I have, but let's be realistic about it. 40% of the CO2 emissions, they come from buildings. Second only to manufacturing. Another undeniable truth about what we're doing is over the course of any year, there's somewhere on the order of 350 man-made and or natural disasters. And the past year certainly is indicative of events that maybe we couldn't have foreseen in the past, but who could have foreseen the Snowmageddon event in Texas? Who could have, thought about that in the light of California wildfires, that our utilities would be faced with the decision of telling consumers that, boy, we've got to, shut off the load. We got to turn off your electricity so we can potentially reduce fire risk. The third undeniable truth, we waste 30% of the energy that goes into our buildings. We're lighting, we're heating and cooling when no one's there. And then finally, we spend a lot of our time indoors. So along with controlling our plug loads and ensuring that we've got green, sustainable space, what are we doing to monitor what's happening on our space indoors? And as we think about it, as we come out of the COVID situation, as we return to normal or whatever the new normal is, it's going to be important that we think of what's happening in the way of future building standards in terms of checking indoor air quality and in terms of ensuring that we have appropriate system ventilation. These are all real things that are happening in our world, and they're going to affect the buildings that we all do work in and we all live in. So let's talk about the transition that is happening right now. And it's really the balance of what we think of digitization and electrification. As we look at digitization, as it sits right now, we've got more connected devices than we do have people. I'm an early adopter of technology at my home. As I look at my home Wi-Fi network, there's only 2 of us that live here, but I've got 40 some odd connected devices between smart thermostats, between iPads, between video cameras. My wife and I just recently got a new cat, so now we have a kitty cam to look at the cat's room. So our digitization and our ability to have instant connectivity is an expectation that we have as consumers living in homes, as tenants in office spaces. And this is going to continue to grow. On the other side of that, we have electrification. And there's a significant transition happening right now. We're all touching this in one fashion or another, but half of the energy produced is going to be solar or wind driven over the coming couple of years. We have a major transition to electric vehicles. And an undeniable truth of our transition to electric devices, moving and reducing natural gas use, is our electricity consumption is going to double. So what do we think is an important, I consider myself an evangelist for smart building technology and the implementation of this technology. But what's important as we look towards the future? We want to be sustainable. So we want to think about using the appropriate energy asset. We want to be resilient so that we can recover quickly in the instance of a weather event. We want to be efficient. We want to make sure that we're not heating and cooling and lighting when people aren't in the space. And then finally, we want to have the capability to have this technology be people-centric. The previous presenter was talking about the outlets and the confusion as to, is the top circuit or the bottom circuit the one that's controlled? We really feel that as technology rolls out, it's going to be an issue of guidelines and standards and setting up and adopting technology that is easy for the consumer to use. So it becomes natural. You really don't have to think about things to make sure that you're doing things sustainably or greenly. So just to restate some of the points I made a couple of seconds ago, 30% of the world's energy goes into buildings. We generate 40% of the greenhouse emissions, and as we sit today, we rely a lot on non-renewable energy resources. That's going to be changing. We feel it's going to be important to reduce carbon emissions by really as quickly as possible. Here we say by 2040. The truth is, the faster we can do it, the better. We want to move towards green renewable energy. We want to decarbonize other industries. Now, as we look at our building stock today, and as we look at resiliency, we're only as good as our weakest link. And the previous presenter, Michael from Northwest Labs, was saying, again, folks don't know what outlet is controlled. Well, that's a potential weak link. So what can we do as we get involved in professional organizations and generation of standards to ensure that this technology is transparent and understandable? Now, a truth of connected devices, smart plugs. There was a fact brought up in the prior presentation talking about the cost of updating firmware because someone had to walk up to an individual plug and update that firmware. And, gosh, I saw the number $550. Well, the truth is today, we've got the capability with smart devices to do these operations remotely. That's not across the board with every device, but that's where things need to be. And we want to take advantage of automation and predictive analytics so that we can see what's happening in the way of a coming outage. Is there a problem with a particular device? Is the firmware not updated? Is it not working the way it should? And how can we signal folks that, hey, something's wrong, go take a look at that outlet, go take a look at that plug. As we look at efficiency, again, we want to be efficient, but a truth as we build things today, a good chunk of constructing facilities or renovating facilities is rework. People build the space out and they say, well, gosh, this isn't what I want, and rework and change orders and that sort of thing really dramatically affect the cost that it takes to deploy projects. And again, I'm going to flash back in the prior presentation, but clearly when it came to updating firmware on receptacles, that was, gosh, that was an unexpected result, but that's an unfortunate truth of the way things unfortunately are built today. But there's a change coming. You know, folks talk about digital twin technologies, and what's on the horizon from the building automation system and smart building manufacturers are digital twin technology. So we can model facilities prior to their actually being built and think through what are the potential stopping points? Where am I building this the best way that I can, so I can ensure that when I deploy the system, that it's going to deploy the way I designed it. In terms of people centricity, how are systems being designed so that folks have the capability to see what's happening in our space? I use this a lot in folks that I talk to. Back in 2007, when the iPhone was first deployed, a good chunk of us here on the call probably said, boy, I'm never going to pay $500 for a piece of glass that I throw in my pocket that, gosh, I'm going to lose, I'm going to break. And as we fast forward to 2021, well, the truth is we're not paying $500 for this device, we're paying more, but it's an indispensable part of our life. So our use of technology and our dependence to be able to use our smart device to see what's happening with the environment that we live in, we feel is key. So how can we be sustainable in our home environment? And again, as we look at how systems are deployed in buildings, you know, we've gone out and surveyed the marketplace. So let's look at what folks are looking at. You know, people are highly interested. Can I turn off lights and devices when they're not being used? Well, the truth is a lot of people have already deployed this technology. And again, the folks that you know, just haven't gotten around to that, 90% of the people realize that, gosh, I want to have the ability to control the lights and my controllable things. You know, and as we go through the other particular, you know, considerations, you know, can we use fewer electrical devices? You know, smart thermostats. And again, looking at the marketplace, it seems that for the most part, people are fairly accepting of deploying technology into their environment. They just want a simple path to get there. Now, I'm just going to use the example of a connected home. What are some of the things that we see is going to be potentially part of the new smart connected home? Certainly, as we look at my diagram here, certainly integrating the solar and the EV charging. As the utilities change their right structures and change the way things are deployed, we certainly envision a world where giving a home the capability to island off of the grid may be a way to effectively reduce the impact on our power plants. Maybe we can use the battery power from our electrical vehicle, feed it through our breaker panel, and power the home if there's an event on the grid. You know, what else do we want to do? Certainly solar. Solar has had a high rate of uptake here in the California market. It's becoming, you know, almost a de facto standard on any type of new construction. But how best can we use this solar power? How do we monitor what's happening? We think it's really important that if you've got smart devices in your home, what are you doing to monitor how you're doing? And certainly, there is no one size fits all. Certainly, companies like OhmConnect, personally, I was an early adopter of the OhmConnect technology because it really lets me know how I'm doing. It effectively gamifies the whole experience. So I'm incentivized to know what's happening, to know that, boy, there's an energy event happening and I'm participating. I'm allowing someone to control my thermostat to ensure that I don't turn lights on when there's a utility event happening. And again, what are we doing on the personal side? Are we giving apps to someone's smart device so they've got the capability to see what's happening, make changes, make control? So as we look towards our path towards the future, everyone talks about net zero. And certainly we feel from our position in the marketplace that consumers have a pretty fair understanding of the need that they'd like to move towards a net zero. Certainly from a cost savings, they want to be able to save on their energy bill. And most folks have a positive attitude towards moving towards a carbon neutral future. And here's just a sampling of some of the things that you can all do. I'm sure a lot of folks on this call have already done a lot of these strategies. So as we've polled consumers, we feel that, again, a lot of folks are very accepting. Right now, over a third of consumers polled feel that smart home products, they should be standard in newly built homes. And we're seeing that, again, in some areas it's happening, but consumers are very accepting of that technology, and we feel that that needs to be an important part of our future. What to think, why are people interested in smart technology? Again, they want to reduce energy consumption. They want to lower energy cost. They want to have some feedback as to safety and security in their space. If you give someone an app so that they can see what's happening with their home, they've got the capability to know from afar that, boy, my lights are off, my doors are locked. So some of the quick ways that folks can do to make their home environment more sustainable is certainly look at what's going on in your space, in your facility. Do you have smart devices? Do you have smart outlets? And we feel that, again, consumers are very accepting of this technology, and the number of smart devices, as most of us on this call are aware, is ever increasing. Again, what can we do in terms of connected home solutions? Certainly we feel that we want to give folks the capability to monitor what's happening in terms of electrical consumption, have that easily be available to your smart device. We feel consumers are going to want to have some insight into what's happening in terms of savings. A lot of folks certainly would like an alert that, hey, boy, something's on or off. Does it integrate with commonly available devices? Because we're a big believer in coming out with a device that is manufacturer specific is, although it may work great, if it doesn't integrate with other people's things, that somehow some of the performance is going to be left out of what you can do in that application. So again, in closing, what we feel is very important is to enable buildings of the future. I'm going to harp back to the 4 points I made earlier. We feel that as we look towards working in new facilities and existing facilities, sustainability is key, resilience is key, efficiency is key, and people centricity is key. And those are by no means mutually exclusive. Those are additive, and we feel that's very important. And on that note, I see it's about 11:25. So GP, I want to thank you, and I'm open to any kind of questions.
Thank you, Kirk, for outstanding presentation. And so I have a question here. In what way can building automation system increase integration and interoperability with other building loads, such as plug-in devices, a plug load control system, or the process load, and so on? Because like what you say, right? So the integration is a key, and also there are so many different systems out in the market. So sure, there is a need for standard, but from your viewpoint, how do we really enhance that integration efforts?
That's a great question, and I'm an evangelist on a lot of things, but let me tell you what I think is very important. Number one, we feel the deployment of any smart technology. Again, my world is, for the most part, is building automation, but be it lighting control, be it plug load control, any type of automation needs to be built on an open protocol. Manufacturer-specific protocols limit the capability of other systems and other folks to integrate. You know, again, the protocols that we see most prevalent in the world that I spend a lot of time in are BACnet, which is an open protocol for air conditioning equipment. Modbus, which is an open protocol for electrical devices. And then there are other IoT protocols. MQTT is one that comes to mind. So that defines how devices should communicate back and forth. So that coupled with integrators that really have a passion to connect and make things work. Because certainly selecting two devices that speak Modbus doesn't ensure that they're instantly going to work, but it ensures that you have the capability to make them work.
Thank you.
So hopefully I've answered your question.
Yes. Here's another question. What are some ways to encourage smart home uptake without a phone-based apps? Because the people looking at their phone, there's too many apps, right? So what are any alternative way to do that?
Alternative ways to do that, and I'm gonna use my world as an example, and by prevalence, I'm an early adopter of technology. But there are apps, and I'm going to be a spokesman for OhmConnect. OhmConnect is a wonderful tool. I signed up for it when it first got available. And why did I sign up for it? Because they paid me money. They paid me money to connect the smart thermostat. They paid me money to connect my Wemo lighting control. And it really is a device to where I'm not necessarily spending hours and hours and loading a whole slew of new apps onto my phone. I don't necessarily have to have my smart thermostat app on my phone. I choose to have the OhmConnect app, but in truth with OhmConnect, you don't have to have an app on your phone. It requires a level of uptake by that consumer. But I think, as I said in my presentation, our smart devices are an undeniable part of our world. And what drives us, and I think a big driver is, number one, the economic incentive. And again, the $20 or so that I forget how much credit I got from OhmConnect, but that was a nice little perk. And now for the past couple of years, I'm just used to occasionally getting a text on my phone saying that, oh, by the way, there's an OhmConnect hour happening, an Ohm hour happening. So for the next couple hours, your thermostat is going to be, the set points raised in the interest of saving energy.
Thank you. So now is about time to move to our panel discussion session. Kirk, thank you again for an outstanding presentation. So please stay on. At this time, I would like to invite all the speakers to join me and for the panel discussions. Do we have everyone? Paul and John. Okay, so we have welcome back to the panel discussion. So in the next half an hour, we will have sort of a joint discussion and promote collaboration among all the solution provider, all the champion like you and the distinguished champion in the field. So let's start with to ask a very generic question. And it's really because we are dealing with a plug load and process load at the UC Irvine. So obvious a question of great interest to us is how we can form a strong partnership with all of you. So the first question is, what do you see as the biggest challenges in integrating plug and process load devices into building level energy management and the flexible load systems? And do you see as the most promising way to address those challenges? Who would like to take a first cut?
I'm happy to go quick, GP.
Yes, John, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate some of the things I think I said in the presentation I gave, and I'll speak for the residential segment and leave it to others to speak to larger customers and in larger buildings. But I think part of the challenge is making the value proposition very clear to households. Why should they adopt these types of technologies? And too often, perhaps, we focused on a narrow application. Maybe it's demand response, maybe it's convenience or security, but we should focus on all of those things and say simple technology in the home can provide a whole bunch of different valuable streams, some of which will resonate more with some people than others. The second piece is just keeping the costs as low as possible. And I think there's more that the state perhaps could do to promote these types of simple technologies like smart plugs. We've seen utilities in the past send people CFL and then LED light bulbs in the past. Why not send people $10 smart plugs and extol some of the virtues of these devices and have them put them to work in their homes for themselves and for the grid?
Anyone else? Yes, Marianne.
So I didn't talk a lot about integrated controls, but let me offer a few comments.
Yes, please.
In the DOE roadmap on grid interactive efficient buildings, we created a graphic that had physical devices that we need to improve, like thermal storage and better heat pumps. But we also had a section above sort of a market readiness where we looked at demand flexible automation and local control versus supervisory control. We're getting better at sending signals to individual devices, like a heat pump water heater or a smart plug. We're not as good about integrating that into a supervisory control, a smart home device. And what data do we need to share if we're trying to do something at a SHEMS level or a building automation system? Most building automation systems are HVAC only. Sometimes they include lighting. Rarely do they include plug loads. But now we have things like EVs and batteries and photovoltaics and dynamic pricing and greenhouse gas signals. So we actually do have a new value proposition to have more integrated control. So the number one thing we need then is the use cases for the homeowner or the commercial building owner on how are they going to save money with this integrated control, and why do they need to integrate? So what information needs to be shared? Is it just status? You know, my printer's plugged in, or is it my printer's plugged in and somebody's using it, or it's off? So I think just thinking a little bit about that, what are the integrated control use cases, and what is the data exchange that we want to see among those end uses? For HVAC, we've been doing that, model predictive control. But for the plug loads, we need to think through those use cases.
Thank you.
And I'll second what Marianne's saying. Use cases we feel are key to adoption because it's very easy as a building automation person or as a smart plug person to know all the ins and outs of your system. But a proper use case really defines all of the things you talk about. How do you want to integrate? How rapidly should you share data back and forth? How much data are you sharing? And that's going to that's going to be a case of collaboration between stakeholders and subject matter experts on all those systems to define what integration means, because there are 8 of us on this panel. And certainly if you were to ask us to define integration, we would have a bunch of correct answers, but they'd all be different. So use cases coupled with guidelines and standards help, in my opinion, help drive us towards ease of adoption.
Thank you. So a lot of discussion about the solution is really related to the connected device and the data going back and forth to achieve this dynamic control. So I think it's most of general audience or the public express a concern about two things. One is privacy, right? So because someone, quote unquote, big brother know what they are doing every day inside the building or at home. And the other side is about security because there are so many connected devices, right? So each one become potentially vulnerable for hacking and propagate into the system. So what is your thinking and how to deal with security and privacy issues? Anyone would like to take a cut? Lee, please go ahead. You are muted. Lee, you are muted.
I'm sorry. Now I should be. So following up the following question is, okay, like there are more controllable and loads are being sensed and online, and how much data is too much data. So for this, and also there's another layer of the privacy and cybersecurity concerns of all this data point and sensing point, like layout in the homes and buildings. So I am there are certain technology ways to do the data masking and to provide the protection of privacy in homes. Like, hey, I don't want anyone to know like when I use my dryer and the washer and everything. But there are certain technologies do that, such as machine learning and load user aggregation. It provides the data masking, and also it provides there are certain ways you don't have to put all the sensors to all the loads, but use like multiple sensor, a smaller size of the sensor to sensing and control a lot of load and do the load disaggregation. And also it provides another, not only the protection of the privacy, but also less sensors in this entire and very enormous IoT network. Less sensor means less failure point in the future, and also provide like less OM costs for the solution and for the homeowner and for the building owner. So I think technology, certain type of technology in this deployment could provide this protection of the privacy. I like to hear like other ways to address the cybersecurity problems. So that's my take for the privacy part.
Thank you. Mike.
I feel I have similar opinions to Lee. From the privacy point of view, I think it should be aggregated. I mean, I think it's just inherently hard to worry about whether or not one homeowner is using a dryer versus another. So I think we should aggregate it. And I'm very supportive of mandatory reporting / disclosures. Your property taxes at home are public information. Yet if you want to find out what the energy usage on the home was before you purchased it, it's really hard to find that information out when you're just trying to maybe baseline and learn what it looked like. So we really need to move away from what is a true privacy issue versus sensitive information. But I also think at an aggregate level, nobody has the ability to disaggregate that information. So we should move there. And I actually am supportive of more mandatory reporting in commercial buildings as well. It's just something we need to move to. These aren't state secrets. This is just kind of basic usage information. Again, at an aggregate level, at a detailed level, A, I think that's just too much data to manage, and B, there is some sensitivity, but I support that. I'm not a cybersecurity person, and I'm staying away from those topics for a while. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone have a comment? Otherwise, I ask another question from the audience. Okay, so there's a question. A huge amount of climate impact are already baked in. How can this various technology presented today make our city, towns, and village more resilient to the chaotic event of a hotter, more entropical climate? This is a fully loaded question. I think it's that the audience asking the question is because of the climate change, there are extreme weathers, right? So, and one day it could be super hot, the other day is like a flooding, and so this is what we have seen right now happening in Europe, in China, and in US. We witness some of the weather pattern shift. Right, so as a result, the recent news for the windmill, like in China, Japan, or Europe, suddenly wind is not blowing, so the renewable energy become not reliable, right? So they have to go back to the coal power plant or natural gas power plant, right? So, and just how do we really make our system more resilient in this flexible demand load management system or building management system and electrification of everything, and in the journey of doing decarbonization? I think that is probably the question the audience is asking.
Yeah, so GP, my sense is that we're trying to better connect supply and demand, which is a really exciting thing. So our electricity supply is becoming more intermittent and variable. And so we want demand to be more flexible. And a lot of the talks today touched on that concept of how do we have homes and buildings that are responsive to something, whether it's a emergency signal or it's a price signal or it's a greenhouse gas signal. And we're starting to have the communications technology and the intelligence, the control sequences to do something like that. Now, if you have your own photovoltaics and your own battery, that works for that also. You know, you might be able to island. But I also want to say that we're going to start to see more plug loads related to comfort. You know, your chair, your fan, a portable heater. So not just conditioning the whole house, but zoning and local control. Which I think is also going to be an issue with more extreme heat. You're not going to cool your whole house down. You're going to cool the room where you're sitting, you know. And if the power's out, that's even more important for health and safety. So we're gonna want building devices to be able to respond to signals, and we're going to want to understand the things, their modes of control. So the plug loads are going to become more variable and more connected.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I read a report for the U.S. General Services Administration conducted by Rocky Mountain Institute, and one of their grid services they had, the idea was switching off receptacles for laptops, since laptops already have a battery built in, and as a grid event. And especially now that we're moving, in theory, out of a pandemic into a new work style, maybe that's some of the occupant changes we have. What devices have batteries built in, and how can we harness those batteries more? And so, for instance, if you had a white receptacle or a gray receptacle that you knew that that load was going to become a grid, you know, in a grid emergency, your laptops were going to just run on battery for an hour. That's not a bad thing. And so I think if we can think about how we shift our consumer behavior and use the plugs that way, we can address some of those concerns. I'm going to go back to Marianne, though. More distributed battery is a great way to address some of those problems.
Thank you. So I think is that those are the great suggestions. The way we see from CalPlug point of view, when we do electrification, there will be more distributed storage, like a battery, right? So thermal storage could be another, also a potential great solution. And so the example is like electrical buses. And each bus is carry about 500 kilowatt hour of a battery for the big one. And you know, the bus is used for the school bus, right? So they use it only for in the morning or in the afternoon. So it could be potential big storage area to support those emergency needs, right? So 100 buses is about 5 megawatt hour, right? So I think that is, as Mike pointed out, there are so many distributed battery used in the appliances. So how do we really capture those information and see how that can be integrated into the flexible load and the control system as a backup energy source, right? So to make system more resilient, I think those are the great ideas. So here, let me move on to another question from an audience. How do California residents and small commercial business participate in a mandate building code when it appears that the solutions are not yet available to comply with the Open ADR 2.0 B requirements? Marianne, I think this is probably for you.
Can you read that again?
Okay, so how do California residents and small commercial business participate in a mandate building code when it appears that the solutions are not yet available to comply with the Open ADR 2.0 B requirements?
I think they're talking about Title 24.
Right.
You know, I think that it's a good question, and I don't know the answer. I think there is a lot of open ADR technology out there today, and the prices are coming down. I would certainly be interested in better understanding that problem, GP, if you want to put the person in contact with me. So the way open ADR works for folks that don't know is that the devices have to be certified through the Open ADR Alliance. So it's a control system or an RTU or a heat pump. And there are add-on devices. There's a variety of vendors that sell gateway platforms and can offer that at a pretty low price. So somewhere in the control system, whether it's in the cloud or whether it's behind the meter, there has to be the ability to receive an Open ADR signal. And I wasn't aware that this was a problem. So I look forward, if anybody else on the call has thoughts about it, I'd certainly be interested in their thoughts. But in general, I know that the CEC did cost effectiveness analysis when they added things like that. But I'd like to better understand the nature of that problem.
Yeah, there is a follow-up question on this Open ADR 2.0. As you pointed out, is for Title 24 building code. But the comment was, there are not enough solutions available on the market to support the Open ADR protocol capability of bidirectional communication benefit to address the duck curve values. Open ADR manufacturers also have proprietary algorithms that make it difficult for cost and compatibility comparison. Right. So I think it's the comment made here is, how do we really come up with some equalizer and make the comparison easier and to really harness the value from the very limited supply at this time?
Yeah, so clearly what I presented in CalFlex I think will try to address the problem. We're trying to make it easier to receive prices and understand what kind of retrofits are required for today's HVAC and water heaters and such. I also think that there was a comment about the controls being proprietary. So Open ADR itself is not proprietary. Right. The control sequence may be, and the Open ADR is simply the capability to, there's something called a top node that's sending signals down to the end node, and that part is an open standard that's compliant with the NIST Smart Grid Standards process. But the comment about the controls being proprietary, that's kind of a different issue, but we need all of that for these things to work. So again, I appreciate the question, and it's something CalFlex Hub will definitely be looking at.
Any other comments from panelists? So there is another question from the audience, but the question was, much of the technology we are discussing are focused on first world problem of people, comforts, right? So, and versus a third world problem line, lack of clean water. How can this technology be adapted to these third world problems? I think the question is really about energy water nexus. In California, we know the drought is coming, and in West Coast, this is the problem we are facing. And we heard the news, Colorado River is drying out, right? So I think the question is, all the solution we're talking about, can that be really adapted to the energy water nexus? Anyone want to answer that question?
Quick crack at a GP.
Yes.
I think the discussion we've had today, we've talked a lot about technology, but folks and Marianne in particular have also noted that it's about policy and it's about market signals as well. It's this nexus of market design and technology that we're going to try to use to better balance supply and demand for electricity. And I wonder if it's inevitable that a similar approach is taken in the water space as well, that we need to think a little bit more about market signals for how we allocate and use water. In particular, putting higher prices on usage of water by large users or by more affluent users, perhaps, recognizing that, of course, it's essential for life. But I think the cold hard reality is, if we don't price water better, it's not going to be used efficiently, and we're going to run into some real problems, as we're already seeing.
Anyone else?
Well, in the water
Yes.
and waste, real quickly, just in water and wastewater world, municipal pumping, wastewater systems, some of these techniques are certainly applicable to water management.
Right. I think it's California is an agricultural state, right? So we do use a lot of energy to pump water. One example is even in Orange County here, not agriculture county, but I believe we use about 20% of the total energy to really extract the water from underground, right? So and I know the Irvine Water District, they do use the renewable energy as a way to do the wastewater treatments and distribute the waters, right? So LADWP is really focusing a lot on this water energy nexus. So I think it's, if you look at California, water, wildfire, energy, really one of those important issues related to the journey of decarbonization, right? So how do we really take a holistic approach and make everything flexible, like Marianne and all of you talk about the future connected society, not just a home, commercial building or industry, and even all the lifeline support of the society. How do we make everything flexible? And so on demand, so everyone can participate in decarbonizing the overall societies and the environments, right? So I think those are the questions probably the audience is asking. And I do see is we are at the very beginning of this journey, and there are quite a bit of solutions. So anyone want to really address this kind of holistic societal approach in leveraging the policy and technology and so on?
Yeah, probably I want to just express what I'm thinking. And so for for applied technologies to address the this is an overarching this is a huge problem, and we can talk this like all day. Technology is one part of it, economics one part of it, affordability, equitability, availability. Like when all this laid out, there are combinations of this, and also policy. Public policy will direct the rate of the pace of the change, and the paths are mainly from technology and economics. So when we talk about like our holistic approach to decarbonizing in the building and the certain sectors in industry and targeting small manufacturers, we are trying to combine all this technologies from engineering point of view, economic from user behavior, and also this invisible hands kind of thinking, and also the equitable, and also the availability for the low income and the disadvantaged communities. So all this in together, we are trying to not only give a technical and economic kind of analysis, but more a holistic approach to combine this, find the most extricated way to find the solutions. So it's more like not only think as an engineer or economics or other type of things, more like interdisciplinary effort. So that's my thinking, and really interesting to see like what other panelists could say on this point, and also GP.
Anyone has comments? Yeah, I think Lee, you point out this is really the interdisciplinary area. So clearly, we like to have a very strong collaboration, right? So, and I think it's to follow up Lee's question is how do we collaborate, right? So, Marianne, you mentioned your talk, so we will reach out to you, and we really like what you do, right? So. So for sure, we will do a follow-up. And John, right? So your smart plug, and we like to try it out, right? So and see how it can be extended to other use case, right? And Mike, and I think it's you point out a lot of important issue there, and I know it's from my CalPlug researcher were telling me user behavior, this is a very critical issues, right? So, and because at the end is adoption of the solution. If people don't feel this is something has a value and also address their comforts, and they may not stick to the solution, right? Just like iPhone is make us addicted to it, or the game, right? So how do we really address those issues? And like Kirk from Schneider, right? So currently you are talking about building automation control and the integration of different loads, but just the building itself, they are, it's like a lifeline support, water, air, quality, right, electricity, and everything, right? So I think a holistic approach, it makes sense is to, instead of a partition, at the end, each area has its own standard, and we are not able to really integrate them together because as a person, we always think whole is bigger than the sum, right? So how we can really have one simple solution, and I don't need to think more. I know you got great, you have a solution and really make it work for me, right? Just like Paul talked about this future, different way of doing the decision making. How do you really think about this is as a decision making and management process so that it can plug into different technology can plug into that decision management making systems. Thinking from that point of view, right? So I don't have the answer, but I am fully encouraged by all of you's distinguished, excellent, outstanding presentation, right? So before we close today's workshop, I want to do one thing is everyone has a 30 seconds to do your take on today's workshop and give some advice to us. So who would like to start with? Maybe I can ask Mike from my right-hand side. Mike, please go ahead.
I think my take was I learned a lot from some of the other sectors. I think residential has some great ideas, and I don't know how to extrapolate them to commercial, but I think that's where we need to think about. A lot of great residential products exist. Now, how do we get them on the commercial side? And I do agree, more interconnectedness and is where we're going.
Thank you. Zhao.
I think one of the big takeaways for me today is that there's a lot of great technology, but the incentives that people face matter a great deal as well, as does human behavior. People do bizarre things and they don't always behave the way the engineers think they're going to. And so let's be very mindful of how we optimize against that as a constraint. We can't make it go away. We just need to optimize against it and provide people with the right incentives and recognize that there are some very simple things that we can do to get people comfortable with home energy automation or automation in their businesses, and use that as a stepping stone to the bigger solutions we'll need to solve the problem at hand.
Thank you. Paul.
I just, based on the conversations and presentations today, I think if we look at it through a large data set, and I'm an analyst, I always default to that. If you horizontally segment data, you'll find that the solutions will vary among segments. So if we're looking for the one solution, perhaps we should be thinking in terms of a suite of solutions. And it seems evident everyone's got some expertise in one of those suites in this conference. So.
Thank you. Lee.
Yeah, as I said in my presentation, holistic approach requires collaborative efforts, and we California Research CalPlug is the Pluglow Research Center, and we're focusing on the very bottom of the electric grid, and we want to collaborate with all of you, and we want to bring out this holistic approach for decarbonizing the grid and the end-use sectors. And thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Marianne.
Well, I also want to thank GP and Li Zhao for putting today's event together. Really, really interesting. I agree with Paul. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And what's really exciting is we think people may actually be more motivated by a greenhouse gas signal than a price signal. I didn't think that 2 years ago, but we're starting to see that may be not everybody though. So again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. There's going to be people that want the dollar savings app, and then people that want the green app. Now there may be a blend. There may be some people that, this month I feel like I really need to be save money, but next month I think I can get by with saving GHG. So there's a lot of interesting behavior questions here, but I'm really encouraged by the technology development. But we need the business models. So those of you that are making a business selling these things, we need a lot of creativity from you as well.
Thank you. Kirk.
Okay, last, hopefully not least. I've really enjoyed participating today. My takeaway is I think there's a lot of fun stuff on the horizon, a lot of very useful and valuable stuff on the horizon, but I think it really starts with collaboration and realizing that we're all subject matter experts on this call, but we have to be willing to break out of the silos that we've traditionally worked in so that we can really define what are the use cases, what are the needs, so that we talk about the appropriate way to collaborate, integrate, and make things work. Again, I've really enjoyed participating today.
Thank you. So it's about time to close out for today's workshop. I will really thank all of you for your outstanding presentation And I will remind everyone Patricia is going to reach out to you about your PowerPoint slide as well as the video and get your permission before we post it on the website, allow others who could not attend today's workshop and can view it. And also, I think it's from today's workshop, I learned the great thing from all of you is everyone has a specialty and we have to work as a team, right? And when we all work together, I believe we can solve the problem we are facing in our generation of climate change. I really thank for your dedication and efforts to really support the humanity in this journey of fighting the climate change. Thank you so much. I will see you next time. Thank you. Take care.